Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Week in Review with the indomitable Doooovid. We're sorry to be with you a little bit later on today. Couldn't be helped, but as they say, better late than never. Over to you, Doooovid, for your introductory lesson.
Okay, as people are coming in, I thought I'd start with a song like usual. So I had a very busy day. A lot, it was a good day. It was a good week. This one of the rabbinic schools I went to in Jerusalem called Or Samek. If people listening have heard of it, this Rabbi Akiva Tatz. He's a popular author, popular speaker around the world. Travels. He's from South Africa. He was a medical doctor, and then he became a rabbi, and he travels around the world speaking. And he spoke in Detroit about laughter, and it was pretty interesting. He had mentioned a lot of this I'd read about. Like I talked about laughter as kind of a sign of bad character. He didn't take it that much, and me and Jennifer have talked in previous weeks about laughter as a form of dissonance. That people laugh, as we talked very often about. When how we understand the world doesn't correspond with our sense perception, and that laughter is a form of dealing with that dissonance that causes. And the rabbi kind of gave biblical impressions about laughter being a form when an unexpected turn takes place. That's when things are funny, is the form of dissonance. When you expect something to go one way, and then it turns out to be something else. And that could be like a pun, a play in words, unexpected story, different forms of your common jokes that, just the unexpected comes out of nowhere, and that's funny as a form of distance. And he had mentioned this verse in his pretty popular Proverbs chapter 31:25. And Proverbs 31 is King Solomon's like Ashes Chayil Miimsa, the woman of valor. How do you find a good woman? And then the whole verse is the praises of the good qualities to look for in a woman. And generally Friday night, the whole thing is sung before the Sabbath prayers. And there's a popular song. I think it goes back to Rebbe Nachman, from what I understand. Proverbs 31:25. Oz v'hodar levusha v'tischach liyoim acharon, which strength and honor are her clothing. Woman of valor, a good woman, is clothed with strength and honor, and she shall rejoice at a later date, which could be like the day of death. And so this Rabbi Tatz was talking about kind of like this dark sense of humor. The last laugh is, the unexpected, like the righteous win in the end, or the the people who are on bottom are really going to be on top, and kind of like a spiritual message where you're getting defeated, but the meek will inherit the earth, or something like that. So I thought that this would be a good song, more upbeat and positive, but also has somewhat that dark message, laughing on the day of death. And it's a nice tune. Maybe people have heard of it. Oz v'hodar levusha v'tischach liyoim acharon. Oz v'hodar levusha v'tischach liyoim acharon. Yada da 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 da, yada da da da, yada da 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 da, ya ya ya. Yada da 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 na 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 na. Yada da 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 ya 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 ya. Oh ay 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 yam ay 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 yam. Oz ve'hodar levusha v'tischach liyoim acharon. So the rabbi was mentioning kind of like the world to come, maybe more like a heaven or hell perspective, possibly reincarnation. Why does the woman of valor laugh on the day of death? And just the rabbi was kind of saying, because she knows that the vindication of a life of righteousness, in the next world or something. So the righteous person gets the last laugh, because maybe they have heaven or a good future, the next incarnation waiting for them. And so I'd never thought about. I had sung that song. I've said that verse hundreds of times, and I never paid too much attention to it. And then the rabbi was mentioning the last laugh, because he'd be vindicated, and almost a direct connection to reincarnation that I'd never thought of before.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's a bit mysterious because of the the laughter thing doesn't always mean the same thing when people laugh. Sometimes they're kind of laughing at people, but other times they're just laughing at the situation.
You're laughing with someone. He was mentioning very often, like, God forbid, it's funny, but it's not when it's not happening to you. Like, slipping on a banana peel isn't funny if it happens to you, but if you see it, it's funny. And there's a lot of studies, like the sense like actually pain and suffering is funny. And if that's a form of dissonance, because usually um, your life and rule set that you have tries to avoid pain and suffering. So when you see pain and suffering, that's a cause of dissonance because like we've set our rules to try to help avoid pain and suffering. So there's a natural reaction when something bad happens to laugh it off.
Yeah, we have coping mechanisms. So when life is filled with suffering, we find various ways, subconscious or conscious, to deal with the suffering. And this includes things like what they call Stockholm syndrome, where people sort of start to empathize with their captors under long periods of captivity and things like that. But yeah, I think for laughter, the best way to understand it is this idea that it sort of smooths out cognitive dissonance when it happens, because cognitive dissonance can cause shock, which is very disturbing for the mind, and laughter sort of smooths out that shock.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the rabbi's a medical doctor, and he was mentioning from what he understands, there's at least 80 different academic theories on what the cause of laughter is. And he said, if there's 80 different theories on what laughter is, that basically means the scientists have no clue why we laugh. And I've talked about that many times, like Aristotle and the ancient Greeks and some of the rabbis or even European culture who just looked at laughter as a negative thing. And it could be like a dissonance, like you're only laughing because you're in a state of dissonance, and you're only in a state of dissonance because you didn't properly meditate and study and understand the world. So if you're laughing, you're really laughing at yourself because you're accepting your own ignorance.
Yeah, that sounds like a bit more of a stoic perspective. That idea that you're supposed to like withdraw from society and look on from a more or less stern perspective. So I can see why those people would maybe have a negative view of laughter.
And then, I mean, E. Michael Jones had looked at reincarnation as the coping mechanism, kind of like the last laugh. And it's saying, like, God forbid, like, no, you're going to hell. Like, you're not going to reincarnate. Like, you're going to be punished for your sin. And, the person feels better about, having, God forbid, not taking their life seriously enough or having lived a life of sin through reincarnation. That was kind of like the negative Kevin Michael Grace, E. Michael Jones initial reaction to reincarnation. But that verse, the woman of valor who laughs on her last day because she knows the reward is waiting for living the righteous life. So even the righteous person may have been spit on and looked down upon by society for going against the grain of the time in order to be righteous. But she believes that after death she has reward coming to her, and therefore gets the last laugh.
Yeah, I think people who respond to teachings about reincarnation with in a sort of dismissive way, I think that's really immature, because it sort of goes to show that they haven't actually thought about it in any detail. Because if you study other religions, you find out very quickly that reincarnation is pretty much a fixture in most of them. And so to say that it's just a coping mechanism or whatever it is these people are saying, well, doesn't that criticism also apply to this heaven and hell dichotomy?
Yeah, or to anything, even to atheism. What you could give that, it's just a coping mechanism to anything, like, evolution, your belief in evolution or whatever you person believes in. That it's kind of like a circular argument where you say you only believe in that as a way to cope with your dissonance.
Yeah, exactly. People should interrogate their own beliefs a little bit more, I think. it would be for everyone's benefit, because if you don't understand the other side of the argument, it makes it hard to have a meaningful discussion. And maybe we can talk a little bit about the result of the streams this week. It was a bit of a mixed bag, because we had that stream on Claire's there that I didn't really think it went in a very positive direction. And I understand most of this work is an uphill battle, but if people aren't even open to having their minds changed, it's maybe there's no point in engaging if they've already more or less made up their minds on everything.
Yeah, I mean, things are very complicated. We could do a quick week in review for streaming, because I didn't do hardly any streaming. That was the only stream I appeared on last night with Claire, and that was a little bit interesting. I did a chess stream, and I did a ramble in real life from the chess club, where I'm kind of finally formulating these ideas. I called it pattern recognition, dissonance, and free will, where you're looking at the chess example of you really it's just training of I teach kids how to play chess, and thank God, these kids are doing very well, competing nationally in tournaments, and saying they're just they've studied the patterns really good, and when it comes down to the tournaments, they're really good at recognizing the patterns. And to some extrapolation, all life is that. Like, life is just pattern recognition. The brain is just a pattern recognizing machine. From a lot of understandings of consciousness, basically that's all the brain is a computer that's trained to recognize patterns. And the concept of dissonance, when the pattern recognition mechanism that we've created doesn't work, or like a chess game, when your opponent recognizes patterns better than you and hence wins. And dissonance, free will existing in that space where you enter dissonance, where you recognize the patterns that we thought explain the world are inaccurate, and therefore we can't act in a mechanic nature based on our previous training. And then we arrive at dissonance, and to remain in dissonance is where I think the essential free will is. So I think we've been kind of dancing around this for a few weeks, but I think I really have this idea ingrained for the direction of working with this hard problem of consciousness and related to these different theories. But hopefully we'll be able to move forward. So the only stream I'm uploading actually right now, I just came back from the Hare Krishna temple, and there was like a kids play. So I'm going to upload that. It's probably not too interesting for the people who watch this, but I'm uploading it more for the people at the temple, the people I know in real life that, like their kids performed in it, or they want to show their family and friends. Last night I popped on that Claire stream for a minute because I wouldn't mind talking to that guy Brutus. I think it'd be an interesting conversation. I don't know if we'd be able to have a friendly conversation. And that guy like Fakin, who kind of just came at you for an hour straight, and then he came at me for an hour straight. And Gandalf, who might join the stream soon, I hadn't spoken to him yet, so that was interesting to speak to him. But it was a little bit of a low caliber conversation where, the guy just wanted to attack me on the JQ. And then once he ran out of steam on that, it kind of degraded to a B-level conversation, like a Babs cast.
Yeah. Just to go back to what you said about pattern recognition, I think that relates to this idea of archetypes, because archetypes are organized arrays of patterns. And so you could tie that back to this cognitive dissonance. If you don't have a sufficient number of archetype systems to interpret your day-to-day experience, it causes dissonance because you're not able to fit what it is that you're observing into a predetermined pattern in your mind. So I think we are seeing a lot of that. I've noticed with these people who are hardcore into these fascistic ideologies that they kind of see you as being more or less on trial for the crimes of the Jews in some sense. So it's like you have to answer for all these things, and no matter what you say, it's almost like they're not listening to you. You're just...
I do enjoy that, actually, because like I love Judaism, generally, I'm not saying obviously not all Jews are perfect. There's a lot of bad qualities collectively of the Jewish people, or specific Jews that do bad things. But I enjoy that. But I mean, people, it has to be a conversation in good faith, so to say, where a person has done some research and you want to talk about the role of Jews on society, net negative, net positive. That's what I do. I love that. And so it was a little bit interesting with Fakin. He was probably a little. He may have been like OV type style informed. He knew a little bit. We were able to have a little bit of a conversation and kind of, had a little bit of knowledge about Germany, but still largely low level and just kind of like insults. So it has to be impersonal. Whereas like, okay, I'm going to argue the affirmative for the Jews, and he's going to, God forbid, argue the negative for the Jews. But it could be in an impersonal nature, like when me and Eric Stryker had our debate. I thought that was pretty good, and it was largely impersonal in that sense, where he wasn't attacking me directly. We were philosophically talking about the role that Jews play in society.
Yeah, and hopefully longer term we can move into a space where, people who can't keep their emotions in check are kept in the audience, more or less. So the conversation with the Falcon guy, I don't know if you caught the whole thing. I was really disappointed both in Claire's moderator skills and in the fact that he wasn't really making an argument, because at the end of the day, yeah, I didn't know anything about this Brutus guy. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, these pundits, it's like, is it incumbent on me to care what these people think if they're asking me to come onto their stream? I don't really think so.
It might have made it more interesting. It was like research is always a positive thing, and protocol is interesting. Like rules of, that's why we do this week in review generally. To what is proper protocol, what's proper stream etiquette, and I was like, fucking, like, do you have a friendly level? Or it's like, no, he's just like attack dog. Um, or is like Brundle or something, where it's like manic or something. One day he's a attack dog, and one day he's like, telling you all this like personal stuff about himself and wants to be buddies. And so there should be some sort of protocol. If he invited you on, like, friendly conversation, a lot of times, yeah, you could just talk. You don't have to do research. I like doing research. It makes for a better conversation. But a lot of times you just talk, like, person's like, yeah, we're going to talk. And even if it was known to be negative, like, okay, like if OV or something or Brundle's inviting me on, he's not inviting me on for a friendly conversation. Like, like, I know I'm not getting invited on those shows to have a friendly conversation, but at least it's, kind of known beforehand. It's not going to be like popped on me where it's like, no apologies somewhat, where he, invites me on and then bounces me. And like, I was skeptical. It's like, well, do you really want me on the show? And, it's like, yeah, come. And then he bounces me off like, no, I didn't really want you on the show. So it might be kind of like that, where it's like, why'd you invite me on if you were just going to kick me off?
Yeah. Well, I asked Brutus in an email, because he emailed me, said, hey, do you want to come on my stream? And I'm very friendly. I'll basically talk to anybody regardless of their background. So I'm open to it. I think it's important to talk to different people with different beliefs. And I said, is there something in particular you want to talk about? And he said, no, we'll just have a friendly conversation. So it didn't really end up that way. And I don't really feel like that's my fault, because I have a blog that anybody can read. It's easy to find. I'm a public person. I'm not aware of anything that this Brutus, the British guy, puts out. He didn't send me any links. So at the end of the day, I'm just too busy to really concern myself with, and frankly, if I had researched before we had talked, I probably would have had an even more negative disposition towards him because of his previous actions and his.
Okay. I got to take like a 2-minute break. I apologize. I got to find jumper cables. So if you just monologue for a few minutes, I apologize.
Sure. Yeah. So just just as a general kind of comment on these streams, like if you're inviting someone on your stream, it's kind of your duty to do some background research on them. And if you're not willing to tell them what you want to discuss in advance, it's kind of hard to really blame them when things don't go the way that you want them to go. If you want to make statements like white people build the best civilizations and you're not open to pushback, and I mean, the evidence does not support that position in any way, shape, or form. It's a foolish assertion. And if you can't take even a slight amount of criticism in correcting your views about the historical record, well, how exactly do you expect these conversations to go? I've already got my opinions pretty well formed. I am open to changing my mind, but if you're just going to come at me with this emotional argumentation, like I'm not sure how many people saw Claire's stream yesterday with the Falcon, he was basically saying, well, you're not a good enough teacher. It's like, okay, well, first of all, why do I care about your opinion, right? It's not up to me to give a shit about your subjective takes on things. And this idea that it's my duty to spoon feed you information is the behavior of a spoiled brat. And you want me to come in and basically bow to your views on society, most of which are toxic and holding you back because you think that you're the best and you have absolutely nothing to learn from anybody. But then again, your country's falling apart at the seams. Your empire died after a few hundred years. You've never done anything personally to deserve anyone's respect. You just want to ride on the coattails of what you think other people have done in the past, and you can't handle any criticism. It's a bit of a dual morality situation. So nobody's really too concerned about offending me with their moronic assertions, are they? Yet somehow it's my duty not to offend other people. No, it doesn't work like that. If you want to come into the domain of ideas and have a reasonable discussion, you should put your emotions as much as possible aside. Because when you get pulled down into emotional levels, it becomes much harder to communicate your ideas. And you may not actually have as well-formed of an idea as you think you do. So these people who are ranting about, National Socialism being the perfect system, it's very clear to me that if that's what you believe, you actually haven't researched history all that well. Because this system, first of all, didn't really last for very long. So a really good indication of a system's stability is longevity. So if you're saying, well, it would have worked, it's just that, X, Y, Z failed, and that's why it failed, but the system itself is perfect, okay. Are you actually open to hearing criticisms on the ideological level without spiraling out into this emotional coping mechanism and just constantly lobbing insults at a person? Because behavior like that, frankly, doesn't garner you much respect with me. It basically says to me, you don't have very well-formed opinions. You can't defend them without getting emotional. So why exactly do I care about pandering to you or even learning about this stuff if this is the type of person that this belief system produces? And all right, welcome back, Doooovid. I was just briefly ranting about the situation with the Falcon guy, and I thought that could have gone a lot better, but frankly, he didn't have an argument. And I keep saying this to people, do not come at me from a meta-analytical perspective. You cannot beat me on the meta-political plane because my system is a synthesis, of analytical and meta-analytical. So if you think you're going to beat me in meta-analytical, I'm just basically going to say, well, which of my theories do you actually have an issue with? Oh, no, I don't have an issue with any of your theories, but it's this one little attribute of how you're teaching them. No. You're not an expert on teaching, buddy. You don't get to come in and criticize my teaching strategy because I'm the one getting results. Do you see how that works? It's a results-based thing. You're not getting results. You're a failure. You're on the internet kvetching 24/7 and saying, you're talking out of two sides of your mouth. our society is the best, our society's in the toilet. Okay, well, which is it? Okay, clearly those two views are incompatible.
Yeah, and I mean, because I enjoy arguing the JQ, but I mean, just for the sake of the argument, I mean, he's fetishizing, Hitler in Germany or whatever, but saying, okay, what about great leaders who allied with the Jews, and Julius Caesar, Napoleon, Donald Trump, Alexander the Great, different people that factually they allied with Israel, allied with the Jews, and he's choosing the one example of the the world leader that didn't ally with the Jews and was an enemy of the Jews, so to say. And how well did that turn out as compared to, say Napoleon or Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great?
Yeah, and these people have these ideas that these were all empires led by Europeans, and that's just not what the evidence supports. So to deny the Jewish influence is just, I think it's really immature, especially with these American people. Do they not realize that Jews were involved with the creation of that country from the very beginning?
Yeah, and then specifically the role in banking. And you're saying, like, you just say banking is bad, or you're going to say that you think you could have created a successful banking empire without Jewish involvement, and that's hard to know. I'm saying, like, certainly to recognize the factual historic involvement that Jews played in banking that helped the rise of these empires and civilizations, and then to argue whether it could have been possible to have came to this advancement without banking, or if they could have set up banking that didn't involve the Jews.
Yeah, exactly. And those are hypothetical questions that would be extremely difficult to start to answer, especially when you go into this hard versus soft power dichotomy. But if they're unwilling to even accept those basic facts, which can be established fairly easily based on the evidence, how are you supposed to have a conversation?
Yeah, I don't think they wanted to. Like, I mean, it wasn't a debate where there's. I mean, I formally debated. Like, I was in. I mean, just in high school, but I was on a debate team, and you have usually in like a high school debate, there's one topic that you debate the whole year, and in a tournament, they're like 5 rounds or 3 rounds, or sometimes it's after school where you just have one debate, but you have to take the negative and the affirmative. Like every other round, it switches where you have the negative and the affirmative. You don't just argue one side of the debate the whole semester, like or even the whole tournament. Each round is switched to an opposite side, and that's like law. A good lawyer understands both sides of the argument, and there has to be a certain logical basis where you recognize, if it's like the JQ. There's certain weaknesses and strengths to my argument, and it's like I mean, chess is a perfect example. That's what the pattern recognition. I know, like my strategies that I've trained for, and when I face really tough opposition that beats me, I know the weak points. I know my weak points, and when I face strong people, they always go straight for my weak points. They pick it right out, and they beat me. And weaker players, they might not even notice my weak points. They don't even make the good moves that take advantage of the weaknesses that I created, and I could just go straight on to victory. Or sometimes there's like an unknown factor, or like where it's just a struggle, like it's a dynamic game where you're attacking your opponent's weak points and he's attacking your weak points, and it makes an interesting dynamic game, and someone comes out a victor, or sometimes it's a tie. And a good debate is like that, saying if he knows the issues, he knows his strong points, he's just going to hit me on it. If it's like reincarnation or something you've argued often, and the better people that you've debated, there's certain weak points where you're like, well, yeah, I'm going to have to do more research and look more into that. And if you're up against a really good debater and you're like, oh man, in like the first 30 seconds, they've already pounded me on every single one of the weak points where I know my research isn't that good. And then like, okay, time to hit the drawing board, time to do more research or study your weak points, or see, is it possible that even if the person instantly finds your weak points and exploits them, that you have enough strong points that you could still win the debate.
Yeah, and this comes back to just the general approach to debate strategy. And I think a good thing for people to consider is, what is the strongest argument against your position? And I have devised a proof of reincarnation. I'm already aware of the strongest arguments against my position. I'm not going to tell people what they are, because that would kind of be own-goaling myself. But if people were actually interested in defeating me logically, they probably would have gone that route. But instead, people are taking, like I say, these meta-analytical routes where they're saying, well, nobody else believes it in science. Well, that's an ad populum fallacy. Even if nobody believes the truth, it doesn't stop the truth from existing, because the truth is simply that which exists without our input, right? It's, the laws of nature. Those exist whether or not we're here. It's not like if every single human disappeared, gravity would stop working. So these meta-analytical strategies are indicative of a real lack of foundational knowledge. And I think with physics, it's even harder, because there's like two levels of abstraction. There's the philosophy within physics, and because there's different schools of physics, you can argue and say, well, based on this belief from this school, your argument is wrong for these reasons. But then they go in even more of a level of abstraction, and they say, well, you can't use science to prove reincarnation, because reincarnation is a religious thing, and religion is not based on science. Well, that in and of itself is false logic. I mean, there's absolutely no a priori reason to believe that. And so people would do better to really look at the argument itself, understand the logical structure of the argument, and then try to see if within the argument there exist any weak points that can be exploited. And I haven't seen that yet, largely because, unfortunately, people don't really have a deep knowledge of quantum mechanics. And so it may require you to go and talk to someone who actually does, and just sort of get a lay of the land and see what it is that physicists believe, and maybe what the best step is going forward from there, if you really want to have that debate.
With something like the JQ, I wanted to go up against the best, because I've really researched it and I believe in my position. And Eric Stryker and E. Michael Jones and Patrick Little, and I wanted to go up against those guys, because I wanted to be hit by the best they had, because one thing, I wanted to win. I cared about the issue, and I wanted to show that my side was right, and I was willing to debate the best opposition. In like evolution, I wanted to go up against JF, and I would debate evolution against really anyone, because I believe in my side. And I don't mind going straight towards the weak points. Someone knew the weak points of my argument, and they just wanted to go straight. I just want to talk about those issues. I would probably still do that in like a skewed debate, because I'm searching for truth, not just like scoring points and like, oh, you want to debate, but actually, like, I want to get to the truth of the matter, and self-improvement. And that's part of the purpose of this week in review is, what are we streaming? What are we accomplishing? Is it just an echo chamber, talking points over and over again? And, we could work on that. What are the weak points of our arguments? Do we have to do more public study sessions or practice study streams, and talking over with various experts? And, the area like the hard problem of consciousness, we know the majority. I mean, hopefully we're going to get more into this with like Fourier series and the mathematics, where I say the mathematics doesn't even exist to solve this problem. Saying like, we know as a fact that the current state of knowledge in science is incapable of answering this question. We could hypothesize quantum mind and different things and look at the evidence that points in a certain direction, but the current state of technology in mathematics cannot give satisfactory answers to the question. And therefore, we have to advance multiple fields of science and mathematics to be able to advance our hypotheses on this. And I don't know if you want to talk about your stream. I think you were on Halsey's stream. I think Halsey was on Luke Ford today, and he Halsey mentioned that stream with you, and people were giving you pushback. I watched that back. I forget I was at that event with that rabbi that was talking about, so I didn't see your stream, but I watched it later, and people were you're talking about like anesthesiology and consciousness in the chat, and it's like, who understands consciousness better than an anesthesiologist? You might be like a mystic, a religious person, someone who's read a lot of books in philosophy, but in essence, um, no one understands consciousness better than an anesthesiologist.
Yeah, this whole pattern that people have of asserting negatives is not really actually a very strong debate position, because if you're going to say, well, Hammeroff is not an expert on consciousness, okay, you need to come back and tell me who is, because most of these people have already decided that, spiritual mystics, they're not experts on consciousness somehow.
There's high testosterone. He's there in the chat and making fun. But I'm saying that the terminology is like losing consciousness. When a person, God forbid, has to have surgery and they take an anesthetic, you wait till they lose consciousness to do the surgery. I mean, that's exactly the terminology, and that's a scientific understanding. And like I did in my public study session, Hammeroff's articles on that, and we don't really understand what it means to lose consciousness on a biological level. There is evidence, like clearly, God forbid, person gets injured and they have to have surgery. They're out. Like you could, do crazy things. You could do open heart surgery, brain surgery. You could, put pins in people's bones, and the person's out. They're breathing, their heart's beating, but they have no idea what's happening to them because they've lost consciousness. And so Hameroff, his microtubule theory is based on microbiology, and that's not necessarily related to him being an anesthesiologist, but his interest in understanding of consciousness is directly related to the fact that that's what he does for a living. He gives drugs to people so that they lose consciousness and could be operated on.
Yeah, exactly. So just to come back to some other of your comments before we go on to the Halsey stream, you said this that you were interested in debating on the JQ, and I think that this so-called Jewish question is probably just as complex as the hard problem of consciousness. You're going to encounter just as much difficulty assessing that as the hard problem of consciousness, because you're basically asking the question of, what is the nature of genetics? What is the nature of religion? And how have these different genetic and religious groups interacted throughout the course of history, which is basically solving, everything, right? And since consciousness is so complicated and consciousness does play into the decision-making process, it's not a straightforward thing. So people who are, bored of the JQ or think they have figured out the JQ, I think they just haven't looked at it deeply enough. And as regards the question of evolution, I think it might be interesting for you and I sometime, because you and I are kind of top tier debaters. I think this is a fun idea. Maybe you don't, but just sort of, just this idea of debating taking the opposite position of what you actually believe. So I think you and I both essentially, I don't know if we feel the same way about evolution exactly. We both don't agree with evolution, at least the mainstream take on it, like this mutation, natural selection model. But it might be fun to take the opposite position that I have, and I could defend evolution and you could go against evolution, and we could kind of look at the strengths and weaknesses of the respective arguments and see what the audience thinks at the end. Because I think religion's tried to answer this question, science has tried to answer this question, and still people aren't on the whole satisfied with the answers. So maybe we can actually help push that angle forward, and it'll overall help push what it is that we're doing with this larger problem of consciousness forward. And yeah,
I'm constantly studying. Like I could steelman usually the evolutionary position, like because I'm always studying. I want to know what the greatest minds of science have to say on different issues, and generally the greatest minds of science are believers in evolution. So yeah, I'm pretty familiar. I could probably give a pretty good argument for an evolutionary case. So I don't know if I'd enjoy doing that, but I could probably do that. If it was under the right venue or circumstance. But certainly, as we talk about consciousness, usually I will articulate and you at least say over what the evolutionary positions on the issue are.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just so crucial to know what the opposite positions are on this stuff because there are so many different opinions and we may not agree with them, but it's definitely enriching to familiarize oneself with the opponent's views.
I mean, Luke Ford had a hard time doing it, but I mean, it's like Kevin McDonald in his group evolutionary strategy, where I could take a lot of benefit out of the theory, even though I don't agree with evolution. It's just like Hamarov generally believes in some form of guided evolution or evolution. He's basically an evolutionist, and that doesn't mean that I don't take quite a bit of benefit out of Hamarov's theory, even though I fundamentally disagree with evolution. But I mean, still taking many positive aspects from his theory. And I'm just saying, well, I disagree on the evolutionary part, but I could still agree with you on many aspects of your theory that might fit into how I see the world um, in a non-evolutionary way.
Yeah, and this kind of comes back to your earlier commentary about having to invent a new system of mathematics to be able to parse the quantum mind and eventually solve the hard problem of consciousness. I'm not sure that we need to invent new mathematics per se, because there are a lot of systems that already exist that are quite good. We may just need to look at the underlying philosophy of said systems and then from there deduce where we can actually apply them. Because if you're applying a type of mathematics to a system that really doesn't work that way, you're not going to get the right answers. You're going to get divergent answers. And that's one of the problems with modern physics, is that they take a particle approach to an essentially wave-like phenomenon. And so the results they get, they have a hard time interpreting because they're not open to the possibility that their initial axioms are perhaps incorrect, or that different axioms could explain the same phenomena with far less complexity. So this can maybe segue into the idea that you had sent to me earlier about these Fourier transforms. Did you want to talk about that, or did you want to still discuss the streams a little bit?
Yeah, I just sent you on Facebook this Bayesian approaches to brain function, and we could start with Fourier series of Fourier transforms, which I think, I mean, Fourier came up with the Fourier series is more a method for heat transfer. Well, I think Fourier was largely a mystic, and he might have even been like a priest. I'm checking on Wikipedia the Joseph Fourier's biography. But interesting. I'm not sure. Let me check the chat if anyone in the chat. Anyone in the chat want to give feedback if they're familiar with Fourier series, Fourier transforms?
Yeah, so I pulled up the Wikipedia entry for Fourier transforms. This is a bit more complex of a mathematical approach here. You need to be familiar with the basic idea of calculus, both derivative and integral calculus. So this is not a beginner subject. However, it has many applications that make it worth learning. So the basic idea behind Fourier transform is that you are changing a function from being expressed one way to a different way. And this finds applications mostly to electronics, and what they call the fast Fourier transform is a key part of how computers, what they call microcomputing works. So
Fourier was educated. He was an orphan as a kid, and he was educated, I guess, as a Benedictine monk, and it possibly was created with mystical implications. But I think the first thing it had practical use for was heat transfer, because Fourier is largely before the electrical age, and but it turns out to be very popular for that. And it's interesting that I'm not sure if you could find a good graphic of the ear biology, where you have the eardrum and like the spiral in the ear with the hairs on it, and the ear is basically a mechanism that mechanically does a Fourier transform. And the idea of a Fourier transform is you take a whole bunch of waves, like when your ear hears like thousands, millions of different sounds coming from all different places, and then it goes in the spiral in the ear and hits different hairs all over the ear, and the ear could break up those sounds and kind of show like you could hear where things are coming from just by listening. If you've taken like martial arts or something to try to perfect your hearing skill, or even on a basic level, just through the power of hearing, you could tell the direction something's coming, and you could even train yourself to listen to multiple things at a time. But the ear is a mechanism that actually, it's a mechanical mechanism that performs a Fourier transform. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what I'm talking about.
I am familiar with it, and this is actually a very good way to model not just hearing, but all conscious phenomena. So basically, the idea is we're going from a wave-like domain. So let's just go into what Fourier transforms actually are. So the diagram I have right now is an animated demonstration of a transform between what they call the time domain and the frequency domain. So you have to understand that waves have a particular set of rules that govern them, one of which is additivity, which basically means that these two waves are going to add together. So see how when they're overlapping, the frequency, we get sort of a different height on this. So it's very high here, and then it shrinks down, and it's sort of oscillating as this blue wave is moving across the yellow wave. And this sort of shows us that even though there's a wave structure here, it only really represents one frequency, which is oscillating in this direction here. So you can see that this diagram here is in a way simpler, especially if we look at the projection onto this back wall here. It's just 3 lines moving up and down. So the main philosophy of the Fourier transform is that we can take a wave-like signal and convert it into a much simpler form. So that I would argue, a line going up and down, that's simpler to understand than a full-on waveform. And that's where this analysis is more useful from a computational perspective, but it also has applications to the human mind itself, because as you said, with the ear and the mechanism of hearing, the human body is performing a transformation of some sort, which we can then model as a Fourier transform between the wave-like sound and the particle-like body. So you think of it as starting in the wave domain, which is the sound, and then it goes into the particle domain, which is the ear, and then it goes back into the wave domain once it's heard by your actual quantum mind.
Yeah, and I mean, most commonly now, Fourier is used for data compression, and just like how we're talking right now, there's a lot of complicated video and sound signals in order to send that vast amounts of territory, or even satellite, or cable, fiber optics, however you're getting your internet signal. A Fourier transform takes place in order to simplify the wave, and then when it gets to the place, it's re-expanded so that you have close to the exact quality of the original wave. But the reason I mentioned that was okay, Fourier came up with the mathematics, and it was unclear whether it was pure mathematics or if he was trying to solve certain like heat functions. And it turns out that the Fourier transform is one of the most useful things in engineering. Like, it's all over. That's, if it wasn't, that's why we're able to do what we're doing right now, because of Fourier series and all different type things. And as I said, the ear is a mechanical mechanism that basically performs the Fourier transform, and that's what allows us to hear. Is from a scientific understanding, that's how our hearing works, is the mechanism of the ear, and the spiral in the ear with all the hairs on it is performing that transform that is the opposite. It takes one simple wave and then separates those. So, that there's the two processes of the transform, one to make a simpler one and then to make a more complex one. So the ear is the mechanism that takes the simple, air coming in and spiraling through the air and then separates it into the different sounds in order that we could have quite a bit of sense perception in the sense of hearing. And I'm not sure if you saw, I sent you on Facebook the Bayesian statistics, where a lot of people for consciousness are using Bayesian approaches towards behavioral science and neuroscience. And I'm not sure if how much Bayesian mechanics you've studied. But you're seeing that these mathematical techniques are being discovered that actually the human brain, the human biology does these things mechanically. So we've had ears and hearing before Fourier discovered the Fourier transform. Our ear was doing that, whether Fourier just had created the notation and the mathematical understanding of what was already happening in the first place.
Well, I think that's what makes it so hard to understand the phenomenon of consciousness, because the only direct evidence we have for consciousness are our mechanical bodies. So you can understand why people would initially believe that it's just a mechanical system, or in other words, computationally equivalent to a physical computer. And from what I've read about this Bayesian approach to brain function, is it does appear to be modeling the mind as some type of physical computer, because they're using neural processing, and these neural nets have to do with neural nets are basically a type of artificial intelligence, which is all computationally equivalent to a physical computer, not a quantum computer. So I guess I have my doubts that any of these models can really effectively predict the mind, because quantum computers and physical computers are so different. But if we look at the underlying idea behind Bayesian statistics, it's a theory in the field of statistics based on the Bayesian interpretation of probability, where probability expresses a degree in belief in an event. The degree of belief may be based on prior knowledge about the event, such as the results of previous experiments, or on personal beliefs about the event. This differs from a number of other interpretations of probability, such as the frequentist interpretation that views probability as the limit of the relative frequency of an event after a large number of trials. So that seems a bit subjective to me, because how are these personal beliefs formed exactly, if not based on prior statistics?
Yeah, I mean, Bayes was actually a Presbyterian minister, 250 years ago, or 300 years ago, that but just trying to model consciousness, you need these advanced mathematics. And just saying, obviously, the brain was doing these things before Bayes or Fourier came along, but the power of these mathematical techniques, whether they're accurate or could perfectly model it, help understand how the human computer operates. And the most advanced mathematical techniques can't answer the questions that we're posing as of now. So it could be that new mathematical techniques that are more powerful will come along, and those will be able to model. And we said the past few weeks about Avogadro's number, 10 to the 23rd, and you're talking about quantum particles that are even smaller than the atom. That you're talking like 10 to the 25th. So you need extremely powerful mathematics to model something like consciousness, and it's borderline impossible. But
Pressing, and then you get to this sort of implementational stage where you have to ask yourself the question: if nobody understands this math, what exactly is its utility? So it's philosophically very difficult, because we kind of understand that if the mathematics are inaccessible to the layperson, there's never going to be a widespread acceptance and application of the theory. And I would like to think that we could sort of simplify it down without actually sacrificing the truth of the matter. And I think what that comes down to is a proper approach to archetypes, and basically dealing with this problem of near infinity, right? Avogadro's number is what, 10 to the 23? You're muted, Doovid.
Yeah, a 6.022 times 10 to the 23, but that's for an atom, and obviously a quantum particle is much smaller than an atom.
I think the definition of Avogadro's number is the number of individual particles within a mole of a substance. So, I mean, to me, 10 to the 23, because as humans, we don't really ever experience numbers on that scale, it's basically infinity for all intents and purposes. Like 10 to the 23 and infinity for a human would be indistinguishable because we don't even have the capacity to visualize maybe 10 to the 10. So we're already compressing the information down to a point where we're not actually visualizing it accurately. So this is where the, high quality philosophical interpretations come in, is how exactly do we deal with these infinities? And we have evidence to support that mathematics has already dealt with infinities. If you look into the philosophy of calculus, it's all about infinity. The infinite limit of inscribed triangles to a curve is the derivative. The limit of an infinitely many inscribed polygons to the area under a curve, that's the integral. So there's clearly some means to deal with these large numbers or this infinity problem. We just have to make sure we get our axioms right. And that this has been the problem with these conscious models, is they don't spend enough time on the axioms, right? So right away we can see that they're using machine learning, and that doesn't necessarily model a human mind. So machine learning is all back to physical computers, which are in essence just really fancy calculators. And I don't really think intuitively that the mind works that way. The mind is a unitary potential. It's one thing, it's one incredibly complex thing, but it's not a series of computations, which is what physical computers are.
Yeah, so in my your ramble on Friday at the chess club, where I was mentioning, okay, we have a program where we teach kids how to play chess, and it's basically a form of pattern recognition, where I could give a kid a program of basically the patterns that they're going to have to study and master. And chess has a rating system, and a basic estimate of time expenditure and progress, and even competitive type rankings, like how will you be in state or even national or even international rankings based upon the work and effort and the ability to recognize certain patterns in the work. And for junior play, I could give a pretty straight pattern. Like to get to 1200, 1500 certain chess rating, you're going to have to know how to mate with a king and queen, king and rook, king and two bishops, learn certain openings, mating patterns, end games. And if they do that, the work will pay off, and they'll perform the certain caliber in tournament play, and even be competitive in national tournaments. And because it's a pattern thought, and it's something that I've somewhat mastered myself, that I could train kids in a way that if they follow the program, they're going to see the results. And so something like quantum consciousness, I think we're reaching a level where we should be able to say the same type thing. Here are your prerequisite knowledges that you need to know to really understand it. Here's the time commitments to those different aspects and tools that you'll need to commit to master those tools. And here's the payoff. Like, if you do like if I gave you like 20 college courses, take linear algebra, take quantum mechanics, take calculus, take statistics, take, learn this, and that. And then, there'll be a payoff level where you'll have this level of understanding of the topic. And hopefully, through doing that, and that's kind of the purpose of the week in review also, is to see what are the holes in our knowledge, what do me and you personally need to continue on our research, and for people new to the ideas, to give them like a roadmap of the different things. And certain people say, okay, I'm not very mathematical, I'm never going to understand eigenvectors or something like that, and say, okay, that will limit you to levels of understanding. But if you still are capable on different levels, you'll still achieve a certain amount of understanding. And I think we've been doing this now. Um, this is number eight, almost 2 months. that we should be able to give someone like a roadmap, like Claire or something. If Claire's saying she's just not good with numbers or mathematics, and we could say, okay, you're not going to understand quantum consciousness like an expert without mathematics, but you could understand quite a bit. And like, here's the roadmap of the study that you need to do. I mean, you refer people to Dr. Hammeroff's page, and now we have quite a bit of streams on our own channels. And I think that's important, that to demonstrate mastery of a subject is to be able to teach someone else and to give a proper roadmap for the efforts that they're going to need to go through to understand the subject.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've been through Hammeroff's work, and I don't really, I mean, I think he's tried to make it beginner friendly, but very complicated model, and without some experience in maybe biology and sort of a brief understanding of quantum mechanics, it's going to be hard to really understand the model in sufficient detail as to be able to draw information from it. I think it's still worth looking into, just so people can familiarize themselves with the jargon. But at the end of the day, like you say, if people aren't able or willing to understand the mathematical underpinnings, it's going to present challenges down the line for modelization. Now, that said, I believe we can still teach it in a way that people can circumvent this necessity to learn math. But maybe I could set it up in a type of parallel school thing where, one class of students is exposed to the math and another class isn't. And at the end, they both have a good knowledge of the quantum mind and how it works. It's just that the ones with the math have maybe a deeper knowledge.
Yeah, and just a roadmap to say, here's the effort and here's going to be the payoff. Here's the here's what you need to know to really understand it on the level of the people, groundbreaking in the field. And, here's how deeply you'll understand the topic by working on different aspects. And if you look at Dr. Hammeroff is the organizer of the yearly conference on consciousness. Last year, he made the consciousness with the Hare Krishnas. And, you had theologians, and a lot of them have no formal science or mathematics education. They're theologians and philosophers, but there's a lot of different angles to approach consciousness from. So you could be a theologian, a philosopher, a metaphysicist, ontologist, epistemologist, and understand certain aspects. And we're talking about something that everybody has. It's like anatomy. Okay, you might not understand microbiology and biochemistry. You're not going to deeply understand anatomy when you go to the doctor and the doctor's trying to explain like biochemistry. It's unlikely you're going to be able to understand what the doctor's talking about, but he could say on a certain level of a larger macro level of anatomy what's going on. And that'll be the demonstration, like Richard Feynman, who said, like he taught undergraduate physics, freshman physics, and a lot of great professors. If Chomsky taught like freshman linguistics, or I'm not sure if he did, but there's a lot of examples of it where the masters of the field taught the entry-level course because they figure that's where the real demonstration of mastery of the subject is, teaching the introduction course.
Yeah, and just to go into this problem that various experts in various fields are having, I think it's essentially an ontological problem in the sense that they are approaching this.
I read many papers from Friston on my, public study sessions. Like Friston, he's a huge researcher, and he's pushing some of the major, new theorems on consciousness. And I read probably at least 5, parts of at least 5 different papers that he offered on my different streams.
Yeah, so people are basically coming at it from 2 different directions. So people who are looking at it from the scientific mechanistic perspective, they're saying the physical body exists. There's some type of quantum potential going on here, and how can I parameterize that quantum potential? Whereas the mystics, the theologians, are more looking at it from the perspective like they're taking the soul as a given. They don't necessarily understand that the soul obeys quantum mechanical principles. They're approaching it from a more intuitive perspective. They're saying, this is the experience that I've had with my theocratic endeavors, and these are the conclusions that I've drawn. And we have this issue of reconciling essentially different dialects, right? And this has been a problem since antiquity, is going into what it is that the sages are saying and then trying to present it in a way that is scientifically acceptable. And so hopefully we can move in a direction of reconciling those two fields, because I don't think they're irreconcilable.
Yeah, it's a direction of further research. And did you cover your streams this week yet? Did you want to talk about what you did this week, or you basically already covered that?
Yeah, I went on Halsey. That was really fun for me. He was a really good host, and it was great to talk about the subjects that we have of common interest, specifically the quantum mind. And unfortunately, the chat, I don't know if you read the chat, it wasn't super friendly. There were a lot of people who didn't really take too kindly to my ideas, but it was a good start. And hopefully we can have more conversations like that in the future. And I mean, maybe even one day Dr. Hammeroff will want to talk to us on a stream.
Yeah, and that's the hope. And you're saying maybe, one day you'll be Church of Entropy, like Dr. Hammerov has had the major conference of consciousness, so that's had some of the biggest names in the world coming for years. And, maybe there'll be us one day hosting those conferences.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, that's why we're doing this, I guess. I mean, saying, because we really want to have answers, saying that we have a common interest. We're both on the same path of seeking the answers to the same questions. And, hopefully more people will join us on the path. And, as of now, not too many. Like, there's a few people, I mean, like Halsey, Moon Man, different people have vague interest in the subject, but like, unfortunately, most of the people that have joined have only had cursory interest in the subject at all. And, it's still interesting to talk about streaming, who we're talking with, or advancing our networking, and talking about the different people who are networking. And I'm happy if you want to have people on, like Gandalf, or
great. I'll send him the link right now, and maybe he can talk to us about his experience, because he hasn't been doing streaming for very long. So
has Mike ever been on this show? I mean, I see him in the chat this week. I don't know if he's like a week in review type that just wants to talk about streaming, like what he's talking about, what he's studying, what type of streams he's appearing on, what he plans on doing. I'm not sure if you've spoken with Mike before.
You're talking about Mike in the chat?
Yeah, I think he's like the secular Jew from Texas that has alt-right leanings. He's been on Jonathan Pohl and Brundle and Luke Ford and Babs.
Yeah, I think we spoke on the Luke stream. I seem to remember he was there at one point. Maybe one of the times I had a fight with Brundlefly. So I am familiar with him because I've seen him in chats before, and it would be great to have him join. I don't actually have any way of getting in touch with him, but I can put my email into the chat, and I saw he is in the chat. So if you want to send me an email, I'll email you the link, Mike, and you can come on and share your thoughts, because we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I don't have any contact with him. I just noticed he was in the chat, and he's a streamer. I don't think JM ever joins stream, or High Testosterone joins. I don't know if Gandalf is in the chat, or if he's available. I mean, he said yesterday he might want to join on. I haven't been in contact with anybody to, if they want to push forward. So at this point, I'm happy just to return to research. If I didn't speak to you last night, like, I'm happy to, and like, I'm glad we could cut short the week in review and just, say like, back to the books, back to research. Or if, people want to come on, or you got more to talk about, that's great also. But, could just be, now's the time for study, and, it's just a sign to hit the books.
I can talk a little bit about the diagram that I made for understanding the role of Fourier transforms in quantum consciousness. And I've sent the link to Gandalf, who can come on and share his thoughts. And if I get an email from Mike soon, he can come on too. I know your time is precious, so if you don't see the utility in staying on any longer, you're more than welcome to leave. But before that, maybe we can just talk about my interpretation of where this Fourier transform would be useful as a teaching tool for understanding the mind.
Yeah, sure.
So basically we have the human body, which we all know exists, but the human body is also the host to the quantum mind. So it's bridging this gap between the mind, which is not equal to the body, but it's connected to the body in some way. So what exactly is that connection? And as we can forge our understanding more deeply of what that connection is, it'll start to make it easier to understand what exactly is going to be required to solve the hard problem of consciousness. So coming back to what you said earlier about hearing things and why that's a Fourier transform, the one I chose to go into was seeing things, because light is a quantum system, whereas sound is more of a mechanical vibration. There's still a Fourier transform going on, because at the end of the day, for your mind to understand something, your body has to convert it into a signal that the mind can understand. So the way to look at this is to see the body as essentially a signal converter. So the body is what is performing a variety of Fourier transforms. So for example, we have light information from the external environment, which is taken into the human body vis-a-vis the eyes. And at that point, a Fourier transform happens. The information goes from one form to another. And we don't have to answer the question of exactly what that transformation is. We just have to say it's going from quantum, which is photons, so light, into a physical mechanical system, which is the body, and eventually being interpreted by the mind, which is also quantum mechanical. So the visual cortex transition would be a Fourier transform from quantum to quantum. So I'm not sure if that's self-evident or not, but we can look at some other things. Emotions, we could say that those arise in the body and then are interpreted by the mind. And because the body is mechanical and the mind is quantum mechanical, that necessitates some type of transform so that the signal will be able to be interpreted by the mind itself. And it becomes difficult to understand, specifically with the human body, because biologically speaking, a lot of systems serve dual purposes, because it's the body's way of basically saving energy. So if something can do one purpose versus if something can do two purposes, it's saving on energy, right? So when something is doing two things, it's a little bit harder to understand and distinguish what those things are. But just very basically, emotions arise in the body, go into the mind, and eventually affect the body again. Whereas thoughts arise in the mind and they also return to the mind. But because we as conscious entities have the capacity to sense that we are in fact thinking, the origin and the destination cannot be the same. Even though it's all happening within the quantum mind, it's starting in one place and ending up in another. So there's an arc that happens, but it's all within the same system. So that's just a bit of an overview of my quick assessment of how the Fourier transform applies. I don't have an actual mathematical solution here, but it's less important to focus on the mathematics and more important to focus on the concepts, just this basic idea of Fourier transforms essentially being taking a signal of one variety and transforming it into a signal of another variety with no loss of information. So theoretically, the Fourier transform preserves dimensionality, which means that I can Fourier transform something and then I can reverse Fourier transform it or inverse Fourier transform it, and I can go back to exactly what I started out with. So this is something that's kind of built into the nature of the Fourier transform. Now, that would be the ideal, but practically speaking, there's going to be some loss in information. So the human body is not just a Fourier transform, because it's not like you can go into the mind and find all the information about the photons that were around the body when you looked at something. There's a compression as well. So the human body is not just a Fourier transformer, it's also what they call a compressor. You're muted, Doovid.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, my tenant's making a little noise in the background, so I've been muting myself when you're talking. Yeah, so if you take a holographic approach to consciousness, then as I said, you might have in the level of 10 to the 25th quantum particles that are acting on the brain at a given time that are affecting this quantum consciousness. Or if you're looking at it as a holographic projection, that the consciousness is a projection of huge numbers of these quantum states, in the realm of 10 to the 25th or something like that. And whether a Fourier transform, whether it's like the ear where there's a mechanical device, and saying the Fourier transform could take a near infinite amount of waves and turn it into basically one wave, where you have millions of waves, and that could be transformed into basically one wave that represents estimate of all of those different waves, and then could be decomposed, where you transform it back to the decomposition, and from that one wave that represented those millions or huge number of waves, you could get back the original information with hardly losing anything. And it's unlikely it's going to be Fourier series or Fourier transform, but something of that nature, to understand what's happening when the mind is holographically projecting these states of consciousness into a unified consciousness. And that could be because consciousness is usually considered like the theater of the mind, so to say, where you have a stage with one thing going across the stage at a time, where generally there's considered like one unified feeling of consciousness. So like obviously there's huge numbers of sensations and different things going through my brain at any given time, but my state of consciousness generally is focused on one thing at a time. So the Fourier transform is a very good example for what the type solution to this problem is going to look like, because you would have all the different billions, trillions, whatever huge number of sense perceptions of all the different cells that are giving you sending signals of sense perception, and then all the higher level pattern rules. And there could be literally trillions and trillions of these higher level rules of pre-programmed patterns in our brain that are all functioning simultaneously, but that is transformed into one single wave. And that wave could, so to say, be decomposed into its individual components. So your one level of consciousness, where I have in my head right now, basic vision. So I mean, if you saw me in the screen share or something, like there's a field of vision where you see like me in the room I'm in, and all these books, and so my one state of consciousness right now might just have all my books on the shelf, but I could pinpoint that down to focus consciousness on one given book, on one given letter. And here just in my library I have millions of letters. So my one current state of consciousness now is just me and my whole library, but that could be decomposed into millions of parts instantly. I could just take a book off the shelf and open it to a given page and decompose it to a given letter. And so people aren't mathematically inclined to understand why this concept of Fourier series is the path towards understanding how holographic mind might project these quantum states, and so it's interesting in this thing. A lot of times, consciousness studies are kind of boring to your average person because it's basically mathematical modeling, and it becomes like electrical engineering, or computer programming, where you're looking at huge amounts of electronic signals, and you're trying to model mathematically to transform these huge amounts of signals into something. But that's why I say, even if you can't understand the mathematics, you could kind of understand this idea of a holographic projection, like a TV screen type example, where your TV, or the old projector type screen, where there's obviously like countless beams of light and different things that project to give one image. So you look at the screen and there's one given image that's made up of a projection of countless tinier parts. And so for the non-mathematical person, you could still understand this concept of the holographic mind as a projection, and the decomposition of these near infinite sensations and inputs.
Yeah, even if we take this idea of an electromagnetic wave, which is what this diagram here is showing, is basically that the vibration is happening both in the direction of this blue plane here and in the direction of this red plane, and the direction of propagation of the electromagnetic wave is perpendicular to both of these inner vibrations. So right off the bat, you're into visualizing three-dimensional phenomena, which is a significant challenge, I think, for most people, especially people with no experience with mathematics. And so it's our duty, I think, to some extent, to simplify these systems down to a point where they can be understood in an intuitive manner by someone who is more or less inexperienced with mathematics. And so it's a real challenge, but I'm certainly up to the challenge, because at the end of the day, we all have consciousness. So I think it's pretty clear that we can all benefit to some extent from a deeper understanding of consciousness, even if we don't understand all of these more abstract concepts about waves. But as you can see, I think it's pretty hard to kind of get your head around visualizing things in 3 dimensions.
Well, that's why I was trying to simplify it to the understand. Okay, like, I am conscious, I'm here at the present moment, and I seem to have a single state of consciousness that I am at this present moment. Although obviously my current singular state of consciousness at this present moment is composed of near infinite parts of all of my memories and sense perceptions and thoughts and sensations, or all these different things that are composing the current singular unit of my totality of being here at this present moment in my current state of consciousness. So even if a person can't understand the mathematics of how you take these huge numbers of inputs and give that one totality, and you just understand that Fourier transforms are a method of taking these huge amounts of input signals and putting that to one current state, that I think even a little kid who has no idea of mathematics could understand. Like, yeah, I understand I'm conscious, and my consciousness is kind of this one totality, one thing. My current state of consciousness is basically just my one current I am moment at this very moment. And but that's obviously composed of a larger part. And then you're just looking at the mathematical tools that would be capable of doing that, or trying to understand the brain mechanical, neurological, electromagnetic processes that the brain uses. And if it was, resonance theory was also interesting, where it's kind of like a resonance, where you have all these different oscillations of the different neurons, and different parts of your brain start oscillating at a certain frequency, and then you have one general frequency that is the current state that your brain's oscillating at, and that becomes the single state of consciousness the person's at. And so there are different angles, and that's not even a quantum theory of consciousness, but the resonance theory of consciousness probably plays into it. I mean, you could add on the quantum consciousness to resonance theory, and they probably, in reality, work together. And I spent a whole hour reading that, one of the most recent papers on the brain as a resonance machine and how that process works of different perceptions that, start resonating. And then, of the infinite amount of inputs that could be resonating at any given moment, that a certain frequency takes hold, and that frequency creates your overall singular state of consciousness.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track with that description, actually. And magnetic resonance is not inconsistent with quantum field theory, because magnetic fields are quantum fields as well, because they arise as a consequence to photons.
I'd have to look on my public study sessions to see the name. I remember he was a Jewish man, but one of the top theorists, that he doesn't use quantum consciousness, but there's no contradiction. You could add quantum consciousness to the resonance theory of brain consciousness. He thinks he could describe consciousness without coming onto quantum consciousness. But I mean, he's got a lot of issues, and he recognizes that just resonance theory is a long way away from solving, but there's no direct conflict. And in reality, resonance theory would correspond quite well and go together. But the current state of consciousness is that they're largely pushing forward these theories at different levels, where you don't have a grand unified theory of consciousness. You have kind of like your qualia and different explanations for aspects of how consciousness works, and it's likely the grand unified theory will combine different things like Hameroff, Penrose, quantum consciousness, resonance theory, and a whole bunch of other things that will all form together to eventually solve the hard problem of consciousness, if that's possible.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things in there to look at, and for sure, we're going to have to use the theories that other people have come up with, because it would be a bit naive just to start from scratch and discard everything everyone else had ever said. And there's certainly some value to these different perspectives in terms of how we modelize things. I think that's a really good place to start. And another question maybe we could ask ourselves would be, if we had a unified field model for consciousness, if we had solved the hard problem of consciousness, what would that look like? So maybe we can think about getting a list of different criteria that would need to be satisfied, and that'll make it easier for us to reverse engineer a mathematical system in order to precipitate those requirements.
Yeah, I mean, you need a predictive model where you could like a computer model that would predictively be able to model what consciousness looks like. Kind of like Fourier transforms obviously work in fiber optics, where you could, or like a CD or DVD, where you take these complicated signals and you compress them and then you decompress them. And so understanding how the brain works, so either to create a neural network in an electronic circuit that produces consciousness, or a quantum computer that could produce consciousness. And so if you think it's mechanical, say it could be replicated, that you could build a device that will produce consciousness in the same way that the brain produces consciousness, or at least to produce a computer model that will produce consciousness, at least within the model, in the way that the brain does. And then, from a measurement perspective, where you would actually be able to measure these quantum phenomenon in a way to demonstrate that that's what's happening during consciousness, and like lesion or MRI studies, where they're seeing that, the current models where they hook sensors to your brain, and somehow they would be able to model a microtubule quantum activity, and that they would be able to have a person listen to music, or look at different pictures or stimuli, or solve mathematical equations, and demonstrate that a certain microtubule or if it was like in a reincarnation type thing, like a predictive model where you could actually predict like a reincarnation, that the states are going to reduce in this person and they're going to reappear in this next state. So I mean, it's unlikely from that perspective. You might argue that quantum consciousness will, the hard problem of consciousness will never be solved in a deterministic. So if you take like a Heisenberg principle, that no, consciousness is not deterministic, that you're not going to be able to create a deterministic model of consciousness. And does that mean that if it's not deterministic, it's unsolvable?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is something we can all think about. What exactly would the requirements be for a solution to the hard problem of consciousness? And certainly what you said about making the predictions, that's very important. And also, if we're going to use computers or some type of biological system or a quantum computer to model it, we have to be sufficiently convinced that it's modeling it properly. Because I think that's one issue that these scientists have run up against, is they're not really modeling the phenomenon correctly. And so it's leading to problems down the line and essentially not making all the predictions, or it's making some of the predictions but not correctly. So welcome, Mike. Thanks for coming on to the show. We'd love to hear your thoughts about how things have been for you lately in the stream sphere. I think you've been on Babs's show lately, but if you'd care to share with us what shows you've been on, what shows you've been watching, and how things are going for you, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, I definitely can't contribute to that conversation you were having. It's about 30 IQ points higher than what I can chime in on. So I just wanted to make sure you were done and wanted to move on.
Yeah, we can move on. I think, you mean, the one of the main reasons we do this stream is our common interest in consciousness, but also just for streaming and to analyze the progress we're making in streaming. And consciousness is not the only thing we talk about. We talk about a bunch of other things. So we could, put the bookmark in the consciousness aspect and move on to other topics.
Yeah, definitely. I came on to the Streamosphere only about 6 months ago. I think, let's see, I kind of got involved in some local politics.
When you begged Brundle, I think I was on that show, and like Brundle was like, "This dude keeps on begging me to be on the show," and that was to talk to Pat Little. Was that your first stream when you talked to Pat Little? Or were you
No, I believe it was Pat Little is his own spectacle, but it was really Josh Smith.
Oh, Josh Smith.
Like, I just couldn't believe there was this Ivy League educated Jewish guy that defended the Holocaust and advocated for the Third Reich. I was like, this guy is actually for real. So I didn't even challenge him. I just wanted to ask him questions, and I couldn't ask him too many because,
that drove you to come on. Like, you just had to talk to that dude. It was kind of like Luke Ford, where like I didn't stream before, but like Luke Ford was talking to all these people, and I was like, oh, come on, like I got to get on and talk to these guys. Like, I'm listening to this, I can't believe this. And next thing you know, I'm a streamer. So that basically is what happened to you.
Yeah, I mean, as far as that goes, I had always, heard about like neo-Nazis and Holocaust deniers. It's like these really fringe people that, like, yeah, there might be 3 or 4 of them, but you'll never meet one in real life because they're such freaks. And then just to see so many of them online just openly talking, I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. And you can actually get on there and talk to them. Except I've had bad luck because I keep getting blocked when I try to ask questions or like challenge their ideas. They're pretty intense, so I got to kind of adjust my approach. But
was that you as a Jew, like, why do you hate me? Let's talk it out? Or was that like you as Josh Smith, or someone's like you as a Jew, like, how could you possibly think like that? And was that what drove you on? Or once you're on, is it like me and Jennifer, who's like, well, I'm really interested in consciousness, and I found other people who are interested in the same things, like you're on Babs all the time, where you're just like, oh, it's interesting, like to talk about recipes or all these different things. Streaming is kind of cool.
Well, I just really like to argue politics and ideas. I mean, Jen, you seems like in your streams you talk a lot about religion. And for whatever reason, like I was brought up Jewish. I never liked religion. Like it just never absorbed into my head. Like I go to my girlfriend's Catholic. I go to church, and I'm just like, oh God. And I just like call somebody. I'm like, oh, I have to make a phone call, and it's just torture. Like I would rather go to synagogue than church. I don't even really want to go to synagogue. So religion, just I don't know. That's not my thing. But politics and debating, talking about history, I really love that. So I like to do that online. It's been really great, but at the same time, you can spend too much time online doing that. So, like I was with my girlfriend all weekend, and I get to YouTube. Like Luke Ford had a bunch of streams. I'm looking on my phone, like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, but it's just like interesting. You know what I mean? So, you can spend a lot of time just debating ideas online, and yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting for 6 months. I've learned a lot. I've talked to a lot of ideas. Like I like the Luke Ford streams. Led me to some of the people that go on there. Even like Norvin's stream. Jen, I saw that debate you did with Norvin. I mean, it's all interesting. I think you were debating like Indian genes. What was that? You were talking about
invasion theory.
Yeah, exactly.
But you haven't done your own stream yet. I just checked your channel. You still haven't created your own stream.
I have nothing. Yeah, I'm really lame, but maybe I'll get some. I don't even know how to do it because you have to get like the live streams or something like that. But I wouldn't mind becoming a micro streamer, and I go on. What's his name? Jonathan
Pope.
Well, I go on his, but there's another John guy who's like a super micro streamer where he has.
John
I like
Van?
words. No, I don't know. I got it in my on my friend list. I can tell you, but I like the micro streamers where you can actually get on there and talk. I like Luke's Ford show, but John Harris, he goes on Luke Ford stream, but
He deletes his streams, or does he keep them up, or he just talks offline?
he deletes his streams. But I like when you can go on and just talk, say your ideas, and you're not limited for time too much. That's kind of what I like.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your views, Mike. It's interesting to hear about how this has progressed for you, and I think what you're expressing, it sort of is a very commonly felt thing, which is sort of this vibe of getting to talk to people who are really interested in the same subjects as you, whereas in day-to-day mundane life, you may not have those same opportunities to talk about things just because people, it's not really where their heads are at. And it's interesting that you said you're not so interested in religion, because I'm coming at this from a religious perspective, and just the debates that I've had, I've noticed the degree to which religion really does influence the conversation. So maybe this will open the door for you being more interested in theocratic things, if only to understand politics better, because I think if you're having interfaith conversations about politics, the religion kind of figures more prominently into it. Whereas if everyone is in the same religion, you don't have to correct for that so much because you all essentially have the same disposition about it. So you can go more in depth about specifics of politics without having to have it turn into a theological debate.
Right, I got you. Yeah, I guess one of the other details, I got involved in the scene, especially on Luke Ford's channel, because I thought it would be a kind of good faith opportunity to talk about the JQ in a realistic way, but that hasn't really turned out that way because it's just like the stuff that people say on it is just ridiculous, It just is like
no one really ever changes their opinion on it. I mean, people have their opinion formed, and then they just like repeating it again and again. And there might be a little bit of research, but like relatively, almost everyone on these streams has maintained the same opinion as when they started.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of that, but it's also just the ridiculousness that people say. I mean, I kind of consider myself to have a dissident opinion on the JQ, and like my fellow Jews would react angrily if they heard what I had to say, but that's not. When you go into these circles, it's just way more extreme than. And plus, they won't even listen to your opinion because they'll be like, "Oh, you're trying to pill us, blah blah blah." Like,
well, if you have the self-hating, I mean, you don't might have to use that term, but it's saying like the self-hating attitude. What do you add to the stream? It's saying like you're just another Jew that's agreeing with the anti-Semites. What are you adding? And then then you have your own dissonance where it's like what does it mean if you're a Jew who's agreeing with anti-Semites?
yeah, it's kind of this weird process, right? You're like, I'm talking to Nazi sympathizers, and like, it's just such a effed up place to be. You know what I mean? And I mean, you can have useful discussions on the subject, but it's so difficult, and definitely public. It's just counterproductive, and even in these small private circles, it's just so difficult to have. You just have to have them with the right people, and it seems to be more trouble than it's worth, really. Because I just research some of the stuff people say, whether it's like the hardcore anti-Semites, and they think that like they know the history so well. It's just that whether it be somebody like Pat Little or somebody else, you just research some of the stuff they say, and you can just see it's total bullshit. It's just talking points they heard somewhere they repeat. The most recent thing I heard is the Jews are responsible for the Armenian genocide, which is interesting.
Yeah, I haven't bought that book. I paid like $30 for that. The book, or like the 6 million or whatever, that had a whole your research on that. And I mean, if your point is like, okay, you're a lover of the Jewish people and you want to defend the Jewish people and you want to convince people who dislike Jews that they're wrong, or if you're more political and like you're anti-immigration and you're looking for allies in order to stop demographic change, and you're like a Jew who wants the whites to ally, and you're like no, like Jews belong in America and we're great for America, but other minorities are not good for America. I mean, you have different angles. I think like your Luke Ford Kyle type attitude might have that angle where they're trying to convince anti-immigrant, anti-demographic displacement people that Jews aren't that bad, but other people, yes, are that bad. And it's a tough position to take as a Jew, where you're saying, basically like most minorities are bad except for us. Or if you're taking like the good Jew attitude, we're saying most minorities, including us, aren't that good for society. However, there are the good Jews, and you could pick out like the good Jews and be against minorities, including Jews, as long as you recognize who the good Jews are. I mean, so there are the nuanced attitudes, and I think those people have a difficult time. So if you're just like, I'm here to defend the Jewish people, and I think I could convince people who dislike Jews that they're wrong about it, and at the same time, teach Judaism. I love Judaism, and people like you who might be disconnected from your heritage, to say like, yeah, take a second look at Judaism. There's a lot to it, and maybe there was something to your own heritage that is worth examining and looking into. So that's why I enjoy doing it. But you have to have like a narrative that like a storyline, like why are you here, why are you doing it.
And that's what makes it so hard, because these narratives, like I was saying earlier, if you really want to answer this so-called Jewish question, you need to basically understand everything there is to know about genetics, everything there is to know about history, and everything there is to know about consciousness. And essentially, we don't have solutions to any of those things. So it all too often kind of degenerates into this war of narratives, like whose narrative is more compelling.
Well, if you have me, like, okay, I'm going up against some of the top anti-Semites, and I'm investing, large sums of money into it. So like Pat Little, and like, okay, I don't know much about the bullshit, like David Duke, and he's wrote a whole book about, Jews being behind communism and the Bolshevik Revolution, and the Armenian genocide. Like, I don't know anything about that, and so I had to, spend hundreds of dollars buying these books to just be like, what the hell are these guys talking about? And so you really have to love your topic in that issue, because you have to know everything. And then you debate someone, they hit you with things like, I had no clue, like, oh my god, like maybe we were involved in the Bolshevik Revolution, maybe we're more involved in Armenian genocide. And then you have to love the topic so much that you're actually going to research that.
I mean, the basic strategy that I've seen is for people that want to blame the Jews. If you can tie a Jewish person, even ancillarily, into one of these events, and just push all the blame on them. That's basically the strategy for the Russian Revolution. And the Young Turks was the political movement, a political party that overthrew the Turkish state. And there was like one or two or three Jews um, in the genesis of that party. And so that's how they try to tie it and blame it on Jews. So,
or I mean, if it's just like Holocaust revisionism, what's your big issue? Or looking at World War II and saying, okay, maybe Hitler and the Nazis weren't so bad, and really the Jews caused a lot of the problems upon ourselves. And you say, okay, maybe not all Jews, but there were certainly some very bad actors among the Jewish people that led the Germans to have a reason, logic towards doing what they're doing. And you're required to look into that and saying, like, okay, like, who were the Bolsheviks? Were they largely Jews? Who were their allies? And so if you really, so we were talking about debating at the beginning. If you like debating, and the person just goes straight for your weak point. So if you're so if you're on these internet debate circles and you're talking about the JQ, and you don't know anything about like the Bolsheviks or the Frankfurt School, and everyone's hitting you with that again and again and again, and so I had to spend a lot of money and spend a lot of time researching, like, the Frankfurt School, the Bolsheviks, and these different, like World War II, and you got to really love doing it. So if you're just like a micro streamer, like amateur, something like that, you like having conversations, you could do without the research. But like if you want to up your streaming potential, it becomes all about the research, and like what they're going to hit you with. Like you've heard the big names, they're out there, and you've seen them debating the people, and their ideas. So either you're going to have better answers than Doovid. You might not like me, but like if what are you going to be able to give a better answer than I'm going to give? And if it's not me or the other person, and that's why I came in. I was like, I'm listening. I think I could give a better answer than Luke Ford could, or than Halsey could, and that's why I came into it. I'm looking like, oh my God, Luke Ford and Halsey, like that is not the right answer, and that's why I came on streaming, because oh man, if these are the guys they're debating, I got better answers than these guys.
right, yeah. I mean, I think you have a deep knowledge of Judaism.
I think a role of the Jewish people also.
Right. I mean, I have some interesting experience and things to offer. I just honestly really don't know that much about Judaism. That I just had to go to a religious school. I traveled to Israel. That was interesting. And then just your own experiences as a Jewish person. And
we can't especially testosterone in the chat. He's like, talk about Louis Farrakhan. And like, I don't want to talk about Louis Farrakhan, but it's like, okay. I mean, I actually have quite a few books. I know quite a bit about that, because that's a big issue. But it's like, okay, if you want to be an expert on the JQ and getting being those JQ debates, like, yeah, you're going to get hit with that. You got to do the research. You got to be willing to, we can't even have this small micro stream on Church of Entropy without like people hitting with this stuff in the chat. And like, if you're, I wouldn't call you like a troll, but like you're in the chat and you're sitting here, well, like, what about this and what about that? Like, you don't know what you're talking about, because like, what about this and what about that? And to some extent, that's what the chat's for. But can you have a friendly conversation where it's like, well, you're right. Like, I can't know everything. Like, but what are you there for? You're here just to point out that, like, I don't know what I'm talking about, or are you here to be productive or help somehow? Can we have a friendly conversation?
Like, why exactly should we care about Louis Farrakhan? What is the most important contribution he's ever made to the conversation?
Well, I mean, if it's the point, like, oh, the JQ, like, okay, what about Jewish involvement in slavery? What about, wage inequality, or what about these different questions? And it's like, okay, like you got to be ready. I'm here to defend the Jewish people, and there's a lot of Jews out there. There's a lot of people who attack us, and yeah. And so if that's your issue, it's like, okay, if reincarnation's your issue, there's hundreds of angles that people could attack you from, and we're still in the micro streaming level. If you got bigger, you probably start hearing stuff you never heard before, because people that really know the subject or thought about the subject, once they start hearing about it, and the debates get bigger, more things come to the floor, that come to the top, where people want these issues addressed. And just due to human limitations, of course, you're not going to have heard about them before.
Yeah, I guess I'm not really familiar with what Farrakhan has said, because from what limited information I know about him, he seems to make accusations that are pretty dramatic, like basically if somebody uses the word Satan or devil worshiper or anything like that in an argument, I tend to ignore it, because it just sounds fanatical. Even if that's how someone feels, I think they should find a better way to express it. I mean, really, like this.
It's like high testosterone. It's like everything in the chat is him, and like he's putting these links, and like, are we really going to click on the links? And it's hard to tell if he's saying things in good faith. And he's like, oh, Doovid hates whites and ignores blacks, browns, and other groups. And I mean, does he watch my channel? It's the type thing, like, I don't know if it's a troll, if it's just his personality. Babs is in the chat. I don't know if he wants to pop on. You understand like why we're doing this week in review? Do you think it's productive or useful now that you've kind of joined the micro streaming? It's good to have a week in review.
Oh, I love it. I mean, this is my favorite part, because when I talk to you, I'm guaranteed to be getting a high quality of conversation. You have a very unique perspective. I do think you're one of the top debaters in the stream sphere. Your knowledge is unparalleled. And, you have interactions with people that are almost always interesting, even if they're not always fruitful. I think it can really help people to learn about these differences that exist between people. I mean, we all kind of suffer from this projection issue with our minds, as we tend to believe that people are more like us than they actually are. And so if we can get a different perspective and see someone's coming at it with essentially good intentions, but is reaching a different conclusion, it helps us to become more objective about things and stop projecting our own values on other people to the degree that we do. And this is just a sort of universal human bias, and we're all guilty of it to some extent. So I think this is extremely valuable, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and to other people. I think you make the environment more welcoming for people to come on who maybe wouldn't want to come on otherwise. So I think it's great, especially because you're always throwing new ideas at me with regards to quantum consciousness and helping me to teach better. Because I already kind of have my own understanding of how it works, but now you've brought this Fourier transform idea to me, and it's helped maybe develop a little bit more a teaching strategy for me, because I haven't actually gone through the nuts and bolts and listed out all the different fields of mathematics that would be required to actually come into it from an educated perspective. So I do appreciate you showing me that line of inquiry. And as you said, there's just so much research on the topic, so you can help sort of filter down what's out there into more digestible basis, and actually look at the people who have contributed more so to the different theories out there. And it's also interesting because we know the same people, we're interested in essentially the same thing, and the conversation doesn't degenerate to like blood sports. And I know I do get into those conversations sometimes, but I would prefer not to have that be, the only thing that I'm doing. So
we can always make that happen. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Mike, if you're kind of you're like a Brundle fan, where you're saying you would be at the bar yelling at Fox News or something like that. So when you're streaming, it's kind of like in real life where the people are sitting around, watching a game or watching like Fox News and yelling at each other, which is a lot of the people in real life and a lot of successful people, business type people, kind of like Halsey type people who, I mean, Halsey might be a little bit more educated or willing to do research, but, basically like he's sitting here watching Hannity or Tucker and yelling at the screen. And then he comes on streams and he's basically, saying the things that he'd be yelling at Fox News or at the sports bar. And that's what he wants to get out of streaming, as opposed to a more academic approach, like, okay, like whatever encouraged you to get on the streams and you enjoyed doing it, to having a more utilitarian purpose towards streaming, that you're trying to achieve some academic goal or social goal or networking goal, or you're just trying to like blow off a little steam and say your ideas and have someone listen to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been incredible. I would take Luke. I think Luke kind of has the biggest stream. Like we all have been on there. I'd take that over Tucker 100% of the time. Even though I meet people that maybe don't even like Luke Ford, I'm like, all right, but you got to admit his platform is great. Like you got to give him credit for his dedication every night at 6 p.m.
It's interactive. I mean, we're basically spin-offs of it, micro stream spin-offs. And okay, I'm
Yeah,
critical of Luke because I disagree with him about Judaism. I disagree with him about a lot of stuff. I disagree with him about even like streaming etiquette, but he's still the base. He's the one who's doing it. Like, I only do a few streams. I posted a few videos this week that were, they weren't interactive streams. And, just to be out there every night having interactive streams with a chat and taking new guests and, it takes a lot to put yourself out there, and then just to do it every night for hours and hours. And I'm not really a news guy, but I mean, you seem more like a news guy. So Luke Ford is probably more your speed, where it's like, yeah, Luke Ford's better than Tucker because it's interactive.
yeah, and you get KMG's take, and if you disagree, as long as you follow his rules, he'll let you call, even if you're like one of these Wignat neo-Nazi types. As long as you respect his rules and don't directly threaten anybody, he'll let you call it like the Rodney, right? Like I love Rodney because he doesn't hold back. He says what he wants to say, and I enjoy antagonizing him because he punches back. It's fun. I like it.
There's a chat. I mean, it's kind of like C-SPAN, where you could only call in once a month, or like Rush Limbaugh or something, where like it's remotely possible that you could like call in and be on Rush Limbaugh or one of these shows, or Dennis Prager, where they have call-ins. But they don't have like chat and interactive, where like, okay, you might not be able to get on the show, but at least you could talk to someone else in the chat and join a micro stream from it, and or work your way so into the show where, okay, like you might not like Babs or Kyle or whoever, Brundle, who these people, whatever reason, like Luke likes these guys and they're on his show all the time, and they have their own micro streams that you could work your way onto the show through the micro stream. And to me, just that dynamic of how micro streaming works is interesting in and of itself, to study. And yes, in that respect, like I have a lot of respect for Luke for doing that. And I just say like, okay, I'm critical because we disagree. I'm pro-immigration. I'm pro-multiculturalism. I'm not exclusively orthodox. I could come up with a long reasons of what me and Luke Ford disagree on and why we can't really have a close relationship, because our way of seeing the world is too different. But I'm 100% behind what he's doing in streaming. Like, he's one of the best people out there, and it's really changing things like movies and stuff like that. Streaming is the future. Like, why would you want to do all these former things when you have interactive? KMG says it all the time, like about music. It's like, it's not interactive. People want something interactive. The technology is there to give you something interactive. Why would you want to participate in something that's not interactive?
Yeah, I mean, even Fox News is trash. Like it might be better than every other network. Tucker might have good takes, but I find him just kind of like spurging, if you will, for like his followers. You know what I mean? Like I would much rather one of these shows, and You can get on there and challenge KMG. You just got to be ready to go to blows because he's going to punch back.
Well, it's within a small niche also, where it's like Tucker obviously is Fox News, and they have huge budgets and tens of millions of dollars that they're going to get you the big names. Like he'll occasionally even have President Trump on there. He'll have some of the biggest names that will come there and tell you. And so at least Luke Ford within his small niche of the alt right could be like that too, where he's okay. I'll get Richard Spencer or Mike Enoch, or if you can't get those guys, other people, second tier people close to him. So within that niche, you have access to the biggest things going on, even though obviously like you're not going to have like senators or Congress people or
Yeah.
people appearing on the Luke Ford show, but at least within the realm of the dissident right, you might get some of the bigger names like that are going to pop on the show. And me and Jennifer, like hopefully within consciousness, that would be our goal, where we could eventually have some of the bigger names in consciousness, like Hamerov or something, would just pop on the stream one week, and something like that, a goal to strive towards. And like Brundlefly, when he got Richard Spencer on a show, that that made him no apologies, and now all of a sudden Josh Neal, no apologies, one of the biggest names in the alt right.
Oh, how did that start? Through Brundlefly, or?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that's the first time he met. Didn't. I'm not saying like he gets the credit for it, but I think that like 8-hour stream was the first time that he interacted with Richard Spencer, and now he's got a show on MPI.
Yeah, no one I've interacted with I consider an enemy or hate. I might disagree, like you disagree with everybody.
But, what do you think about the IRL, where you're thinking like Norvin, and like now Norvin is, he had those guys who protested the Holocaust event in Missouri on his show.
I didn't see that. So he hosted some people, and what did they protest?
There was some Holocaust memorial event in Missouri, and this guy John the Confederate, in real life, and they were marching with like Nazi flags, and Billy Roper was there, and like the day after they were on Norvin's show.
Yeah, I think it's ridiculous. I was saying in the chat how the Wignats are all about bringing a fight, blah blah blah, but really I think the biggest victims in that circle are themselves and what their own delusions. So when you look in the future, the biggest victims is going to be themselves when they wake up one day. Just like that movie American History X, right? He was the neo-Nazi, and eventually, could you imagine being these Wignats and hating that movie because at the end he cucks, right, and becomes not super racist?
Someone's going to have those beliefs. So the power of the internet is that you're connecting to the people who have those beliefs. Like, obviously you knew that there were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of neo-Nazis across America, and you may never have dealt with them. But through the power of the internet, it's just the question, okay, like Luke Ford specializes in the alt-right and like TRS and those type people. And so it's your echo chamber that you purposely join. So if you're just curious, if you were a person who like used to watch like BBC, documentaries like HBO, and you loved American History X, and now you're on the internet, like God forbid, like pornography or something like that, you get the internet and you're like, what's on here? And like, oh, pornography. Next thing you know, you're watching that all day. And to some extent, it could be like the alt-right is like that too, where it's like, well, why are you watching this stuff? Like, isn't like consciousness and Judaism and these other things more interesting? It's you who are self-selecting for these echo chambers.
Yeah, like I was listening to the one live stream, and they were basically, going on for a very long time about how blue eyes and blonde hair is correlated with intellectual superiority. And that's a patently unscientific, moronic, superficial opinion to take, but they'll defend it to the death. And then it's kind of annoying that they're saying, well, the Jews are in an echo chamber and won't change their minds, when they're also in an echo chamber and won't change their minds. And at the end of the day, the situation we're in today took thousands of years to precipitate. Understanding it's going to require a significant amount of study and knowledge. And yeah, at the end of the day, maybe it's not a question of scapegoating. It's a question of understanding what role we've all played in creating a situation that's fundamentally unsustainable.
Well, it's kind of like the YouTube and these streams is kind of like a choose your own adventure.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess I'm disappointed. I wish people were more interested in understanding the truth rather than cloistering themselves off into an echo chamber and becoming essentially impervious to evidence. I mean, this idea that blonde hair and blue eyes makes you superior is just so absurd. You'd have to deny so much evidence, right? Like, I have brown eyes. Does that mean something?
Well, isn't that the whole Aryan thing, right? Blonde hair, blue eyes.
Well, first of all, Arya means noble. There's no connection to skin color. That's something that came along much later that was put in, probably by subversives out of England. And so the fact that they believe this idea without actually researching it, it just sort of shows that they're just coping with the fact that they're in an unfavorable position in society. And they don't seem to realize that that's not going to solve your problems. To fantasize about how great your blue eyes are, that's actually not going to do any good in the grand scheme of things, because it's not true.
What about, what's the acronym? It's basically like biological differences. I can't remember the acronym that everyone talks about. Luke Ford or the alt-right or whatever.
Are you thinking of HBD? Because that's the
yeah,
first.
Yeah, HBD. I mean, that's what's constantly talked about. Seems to me like there's something, like there's some science behind that. But the meaning that you draw from that, is something totally different beyond science, So, like maybe, Doovid, you talk a lot about diversity and you mix with different people. I'm in Houston, and just by what I decide to do on a daily basis, what part of the city I go to, I could be around all Asian people, or primarily Black people, or Latinos, or whites. It's like very mixed. Racially, it's as diverse as you can get. Obviously, it's not as diverse as like a New York or Los Angeles, but it's very mixed racially. You know what I mean? So, but people tend to coexist pretty peacefully. I guess this freeze. No, I guess I don't know. I guess I was thinking people. It's an important consideration of HBD, but maybe people put too much emphasis on it. I don't know.
Well, I mentioned that you would think that HBD is more important to multiculturalists, to people who like diversity and want to know all different types of people. Like, it's interesting to me because I like all, studying cultures and interacting and dealing with different people. But oddly, it's most talked about by people who are against it.
Oh, you mean who use it to, put other races down or whatever, or
yeah, I love interfaiths. My whole YouTube channel was interfaiths and built up on, new group, Buddhists and Jains and Baha'is and Zoroastrians and so on and so on. And, let's all come together and talk about our different cultures and traditions. And it's awesome. And we'll create this great society all living together in peace and harmony. And therefore, human biodiversity is an important issue to study in order to be able to do that, efficiently, respectfully, so on and so on. But the majority of the people talking about it are talking about it in order to fight diversity.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important point. I think it can definitely be used as a weapon. It's weaponized. You got the advocates of each racial group. Every time there's a perceived microaggression or macroaggression or whatever you want to call it. It's, white people are bad, they did this, or you know what I mean? It's like on an everyday basis, the average person of one race or another gets along perfectly fine, no problem, mostly, right? But you get the advocates of that group. Um, for example, it's kind of a stupid story, but illustrates the point. I was sitting down with my Indian friend. We were watching. Remember that movie Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom, where they eat? They sit down for a dinner and they bring out like the snakes and like all the creepy. They cut open like a boa constrictor and all these snakes come out. I said to my Indian friend, like, "Aren't you offended? Like they're insulting your cuisine?" And he said, "No, it's not offensive because anyone who knows Indian culture would know they wouldn't eat snakes like that." And I'm like, "Yeah, but the Indian guy, like the representative of her community, would get outraged and post on Twitter." I was kind of making the point that like the people in the media and the spokesmen of each group don't represent the actual group. You know what I mean? They're kind of just like putting their talking points out there, whereas the actual people in those groups like, usually get along fine, right?
Well, now with the advent of YouTube, you're saying like, well, movies like that are just kind of stupid. Okay, like I watched that movie in the '80s or when I was young, whenever it came out, and it was kind of cool and exciting. But like now with YouTube, um, you could see those actual temples, and it's just kind of like stupid. Why do you want like actors and fake stuff when you could see real stuff? And maybe there is some benefit to people to just being entertained like that. But looking back, it's saying like, yeah, that was just misinformation. Um, Maybe it was a tiny bit entertaining, but like relatively, it was probably just a waste of time. So I took a pretty hard attitude against entertainment like that, and saying I don't want to be misinformed. I don't want to just waste my time, being entertained and putting a bunch of bad ideas in my head. I'd rather actually be like hanging out with Indians and really learning about their culture.
What exactly do people mean when they say HBD? Because it's not clear to me what that even means at this point.
I mean, to me, it could just mean like multicultural. I mean, Kyle was on last week and saying his thing, and it was just like human biodiversity is a buzzword for the alt right, and like Norvin uses it, and you're saying like, yeah, it's a multiculturalism, or race realism. But people, it's a word buzz thing where it's like Kyle or Norvin will tell you like, no, that's not what it means, and they're trying to use it like as a sibboleth to weed people out by having elusive terms to be like whatever, as opposed to that. Yeah, obviously people are different. There's, I'm listening to a course on the world language families. There's 7,000 different languages. There's, almost 200 different nations recognized by the UN. And you travel around, there's so many different ways of doing things and diversity. And it's interesting if you like people, um, you need to know it. You're saying if you don't like people, and it's like, oh, I'm never going to be able to deal with these people. I just need like my ethno state where everybody acts the way I like them to act, so I don't have to deal with it. As opposed to someone like, no, I mean, like I enjoy people who are different and learning about their culture and interacting with them, and I'm willing to do research. I'm willing to be respectful and willing to be tolerant.
My experience, HBD is basically an explanation for differences between people from different races. So we hear the explanation for why certain people have a certain income or IQ that's different from other groups is basically because of institutional racism, XYZ. There's certain explanations which are politically correct, talked about in the media, but HBD is actually coming along and saying no, there's actually differences between racial groups, and not just racial groups. It's men and women. Certain of these explanations we know to be obvious, right? Men have more testosterone than women. Men can develop bigger muscles than women. They can lift more weight on average, right? So it's basically that kind of explanation between races, which in some instances doesn't seem offensive or we're used to talking about. In other instances, people get very offended. We look at the Olympic 100-meter dash, and no one would be shocked to see that everyone in that race is black. 9 or 10 out of 10 of the guys in that race are black. And what's the explanation for that? Is it environmental? Is it biological? It's basically an attempt to explain those phenomena. That's the best simple.
As I was driving home, I was listening to this, John McWhorter, if you've ever heard of him. He's a linguist at Columbia, and he's got these lecture series, and he's on the news, and he's kind of semi-alt-righter, African-American, anti-racist, but he was mentioning Caucasian comes from the skull type, that historically, when they were trying to determine human biodiversity based on skull types, and they originally had like Negroid, Mongoloid, and Caucasian, and what came to refer to the white people's skull type was originally taken from a skull in the Caucasus Mountains, and that's why Caucasian was referred to white people, because of the skull type that people have, and there's divisions within the skull type. So within historically, like human biodiversity could refer to any type of biological factors, not just skin tone, hair color, eye color, but also bone structure, and in the alt-right circles, IQ, crime statistics are one of the biggest things that they care about, just like IQ and crime statistics. But scientifically, you could measure these things. It has been measured. There's millions and millions of qualities of a human being, and there's differences in the qualities among different peoples. It's hard to draw borders, like what does it mean, like Caucasian, who is white, or who is what, or subdivisions and language families, and these different things. They're very complicated. Universal humanism, like human value, causes people like, no, all people are the exact same. There is no difference between man and women. And political correctness, which has caused like the backlash to say like, like you guys are being ridiculous. Like obviously men and women are different. And so it seems like like alt-right and these spheres, it's just kind of like stupid. It's a pushback against political correctness, but they're not really scientifically looking at the phenomenon and trying to understand actual human biodiversity.
And what's kind of your outlook on? Do you kind of agree with what some of those people are saying, whether it be Jared Taylor, American Renaissance, differences in IQ, like how much importance do you put on those conclusions, and what do you think?
Well, there's some truth to them. Obviously, like the tests and the statistics, they've been measured. Human potential, what comes of it, like does that have implications to immigration or multiculturalism or diversity in life, is debatable. Whether to say like, are you going to debate the facts that people look different and have different skills? And I'm not going to debate the facts. I'll study the facts. We could analyze the facts, and to me that's interesting. That's what I love doing. That's part of the reason I like streaming.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion on, basically the alt-right is saying overall, to summarize, I pretty much think they're saying, we need to be by our, like needs to be with like, we need our ethno-states, or we need to separate people. But
I'm more an ethnographer. I'm saying that to them, HBD is an excuse for immigration and demographic policy. Like to me, it's interesting because I want to meet those people. I want those people in my society, and therefore I'm willing to study them so I could be able to interact with them in a more better way. But I think, typically on the alt-right, they're not actually interested in the science of human biodiversity. They're more interested in using it to win debates on immigration.
Yeah, it seems like people are coming at this from two different perspectives. From the one perspective, the HBD thing appears to be kind of a way to deal with the backlash against the viewpoint that everybody's exactly the same and the only reason anything's different is because of institutional injustice. So they're basically maybe taking a different stance on the facts and saying, yeah, there is a biological reason for some of these differences, but I'm not sure that they really disagree fundamentally on things like multiculturalism and immigration.
You know, saying they're not really interested in the truth, or even like Kyle, maybe he has a tiny bit, or Luke Ford has a tiny bit of interest, but they're not really students of the science of human biodiversity. They're more just using it in order to win arguments on the issues they care about, such as demographic replacement and immigration. They're saying the reason, you don't see what I'm saying, where it's one thing where a person's like, this science of human biodiversity interests me, and I want to be an ethnographer that's documenting all these different type peoples and the different qualities of different people, versus people they don't really care about that. They just want to convince you that immigration is bad.
Well, they're essentially using the same body of information to draw different conclusions. And because the conclusions are different, they have to kind of focus on different aspects of the bodies of information.
Like IQ and crime statistics.
Yeah, exactly.
Like economic output, or
yeah, you hear this idea that IQ predicts everything, and that's just, I don't really think that answers the whole question by a long shot.
Yeah, I mean, that's more like a news type person. So if you're like, okay, President Trump and his immigration policy, you're saying like, oh, no, we want these people in society who could be productive. And if IQ is a good indicator, let's just use like IQ tests, as part of the factor for who gets to come into the country. Yeah, as opposed to President Obama and the immigration lottery, where it was like, no, we want more diversity, more different. So just showing that you're underrepresented, you had an immigrant lottery where you just show there's not a lot of people like me in your country, and then therefore you could get into the country by representing a group that's not well represented, regardless of the qualities of like intelligence or productivity. You're just saying just the fact that you're unique, we want you.
Yeah, I guess I should read more into what the HBD people are saying, because I'm not too clear on what their attitudes really are, or what exactly it is that they're trying to establish. Because to me, it seems self-evident that different people of different genetic heritage are going to be different. And
it seems a moot point. If you're an ethno-nationalist, HBD doesn't really matter to you. So the whole reason they mention it is for the purpose of negativity. I mean, like that's, I get in a lot of conversations with people, and they just like, I don't want to hear you bash like Mexicans or blacks. It's not interesting to me. Like, I mean, you force me into a conversation where I'm defending blacks or Mexicans, like I'll do it, but that's basically the HBD where they're just going to come and hit you. Like, don't you know that these people are all messed up, and they're going to give you a whole bunch of statistics to show why they're messed up and they don't belong in the country. And it's related to the JQ, basically the same thing on the JQ, where it's like, don't you know Jews are messed up and society would be better off if they weren't here.
yeah, it's too bad that people aren't doing as many formal debates. I was watching that show that was recently uploaded to the Brundlecast archive, where you talked to, I think it was Norvin and a few other people it went on for quite some time. I haven't finished the whole thing, but that appeared to be more of a formal debate type situation. And it's kind of too bad that we're not seeing that happen as much these days. I hope we can go back to that, but maybe have a more nuanced debate where people who are performing the debates are actually well educated and aren't going to start getting overly emotional and making accusations and stuff, because I don't really think that helps. Just to say,
well, my point I made last week, like, although I support what Luke Ford is doing, and critical that basically he rigs debates. So it's like, he's basically came to the conclusion that diversity and immigration is bad, and like anybody who doesn't see that is just ridiculous and not worth talking to. And so that it's not real exchanges of information. They're basically rigged debates. And, because we disagree on such a paramount issue, that me and Luke can't be friends because I'm pro-immigration, he's anti-immigration, and that's enough that basically we can't be friends.
Yeah, it's kind of too bad because I think it could have been interesting if you'd have stayed on the Luke Ford show. 'Cause I think you have a lot of interesting things to say. It's too bad when people can't keep talking, even though they may not agree on certain things. That doesn't mean that we don't have anything to learn from each other. And it's not like hearing someone's opinion who differs from your own is necessarily going to change your mind, but it might help you explore your own ideas more and understand, we all are coming at this from a limited biased perspective that was largely influenced by the culture we grew up in. And if, this multiculturalism thing is inevitable, then like you said, it pays to understand exactly what that entails.
Yeah, so that's why I say my streams are kind of like with the people I became friendly with are kind of the people like multicultural is inevitable, or even whether it's inevitable or not. Like you're saying, I like multiculturalism. I want to learn more about it. I want to be successful about it. With it, I'm interested in learning about new cultures and dealing with these people in a respectful manner because that's the world I see myself living in versus the people who are fighting it. And it changes the whole nature of the show where Luke, one of the underlying assumptions of his show is that that's a bad thing and needs to be fought against. So you get Mike or something who might be more on his side in that could be a regular guest, but like Doovid, I just can't be a regular friend or guest on that because it's just a fundamental tenet of his show that I'm against. And he doesn't, like, what are we just going to debate that every show and say, let's agree to disagree? And we weren't able to do that. And, so hence we ended off on bad relations.
Actually, Church, unless you were going to say something, I guess hearing you say that, my biggest pushback would be, okay, you say multiculturalism, which of course is implying multicultures, but what about the risk of being dominated by one in particular culture, whether it be Mexican immigration or another culture or country? Would you be concerned about that?
I'm concerned about a lot of things. It's just that this phenomenon of multiculturalism has been going on for far longer than most people understand. And in order for people to get a realistic appraisal of this modern day situation, they have to understand the history. And what I'm encountering is that people basically understand one part of history and they're unwilling to go deeper. So it's it limits the domain of what you can really talk about because they've already kind of got their viewpoint settled as like, okay, well, 1950s was the best. And we have to go back to 1950s and it was already perfect back then. And I'm basically saying it wasn't perfect back then. It was already going downhill. And if you want to fix things or make things more the way you want them to be, you have to understand what the root of the sociological decay is. And that's kind of where I'm hitting up against a brick wall because people are not open to understanding the truth about history.
Right. Well, I mean, I am concerned about demographic change in the United States, but at the same time, it's kind of baked into the cake, and we already really are multicultural in a lot of different ways. So it's like we need to figure out how to make it work the way it is. In my particular city, Houston, which isn't the best city, but it's got some good things going on. I don't know what the breakdown is, but I don't know, just call it like a quarter white, quarter black, quarter Hispanic, and Asian. It's basically like all those groups interacting. And it's going to be more or less like that in a lot of other different cities. And either that's going to work or, like some of these people want, it's going to break down and become a civil war or something, which I don't want.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. And then I would say we have to look at history and the history of wars for the last maybe 2,000 years has followed a very specific pattern. And if people are willing to understand that pattern, it will make averting a civil war much likelier. But unfortunately, people don't want to do that because they don't want to feel like their racial group is responsible for, whatever, what have you. It's just what I'm seeing is essentially Jews and Europeans kind of scapegoating each other, and that's not
Yeah.
going to solve anything, because what happened, like the West, the way I look at the West is it was a collaborative effort between Jews and Europeans, where Jews were at the head of it. Essentially, everything we know as the West in terms of imperialism was done by Jewish money. So if people want to say, well, Europeans built the West right then and there, that's not even true, right? And then you could go into this thing of what are Western values? Okay, and some people will say Judeo-Christian values. Other people will say, absolutely not. There's no such thing as Judeo-Christian values. So right there, you've hit up against a theological divide. And if people aren't willing to bridge that gap, essentially the conversation ends there and they don't get any deeper understanding.
Right. Well, the way I see it, and I hope, is that the better minds amongst each group are going to coexist and won't devolve into civil war. So far.
I would really like to have a situation where wars, because the way I see it is conflict is kind of inevitable. There's something in us that drives us towards war, resource scarcity, ideological differences, etc. What I would like to see is us focus our attention towards going back to a situation where basically wars aren't devastating the entire culture, right? Like they're not genocides. They're just conflicts that don't destroy either population and still maintain good historical records and good knowledge records. But what's been happening, unfortunately, for a long time is that when people are basically doing a scorched earth policy, they'll come in, kill everyone, and well, not everyone, but they'll kill the upper class and enslave the lower class. And this has been kind of the history for 2,000 plus years. So we have to it's an ideological shift that we have to make and say we don't want to do this anymore. We want to have a system that is minimizing the amount of conflict, because I guess I see the last 2,000 years as more or less soaked in blood, unfortunately.
Well, it's probably not directly addressing what you just said, but a lot of people in the chats, or like Luke Ford's chat, are upset about all the anti-white things that are said in the media, which is disturbing to me too, but I'm hoping that's just kind of a short-term thing. That's just kind of the flavor of the day, because I think that needs to go away. Because
it's not a short-term thing. It's a lead up to a communist-style revolution genocide. So if you look at the history of communist revolutions, there's always a propaganda stage where they demonize a class in society. In China, it was the landowners, the farmers. In Russia, it was, I guess, the king, Christian people, and stuff like that. So they were demonized and eventually murdered en masse. And that's the pattern I see coming for the West, is just this what you call anti-white, anti-patriarchy sort of propaganda, nonstop propaganda. That will just continue on. It will get more intense, more hateful. And the goal is to dehumanize these people so that eventually nobody feels too guilty about killing them en masse.
Well, I don't know. I think I have a pretty, actually moderate view, coexistence first, civil war second. That's the backup plan. So that's about it.
Coexistence is hard because what seems to happen is that there is a with these Jewish/European collaborative efforts, what seems to happen is that there's a period where coexistence works, and then there's also a period of saturation of wealth, where, like, what you call the shrinking middle class, and less people are deriving enough benefit from the system to justify their allegiance to it. So you get kind of this peasant revolt type situation, sociological breakdown, an eventual civil war. So basically, there's only so much stuff to go around. And this idea of kind of very rapid wealth expansion, as was seen in America, and before that UK, and before that even going back to Rome, always leads to a subsequent saturation of wealth, and to some extent that's just spontaneous, and then an eventual sociological breakdown, because there's just not enough people getting enough gibs to justify their allegiance to the system.
Mm-hmm. And without doxing yourself or anything, I was just curious. Your accent, it sounds a little bit similar to, like, maybe sort of Canadian-ish. So are you like from up north somewhere?
Yeah, I was born in Montreal, and I grew up in a suburb of Montreal, but I was living in Ontario since I was about 11, and I went to school in Ottawa, and then I worked in Ottawa.
Mm.
I don't live in Canada anymore. I moved because I got married. But yeah, that's probably what you're recognizing my accent from. And you said you're from Texas?
I'm from the Northeast. I'm from Connecticut, but I moved to Texas. So I've been here like 2014, which I really like.
Oh. But yeah, because I didn't recognize any like Texan accent. I've been to Dallas before on a work trip, and they did have a bit more of a distinct Southern twang.
Yeah, well, I say y'all now because we used to always make fun of Southern culture, but y'all is just the most addicting word. And you wouldn't get made fun of in the Northeast for it, but, down here everyone says it. And there's all different derivatives of it. So, like, I have another friend from Connecticut who moved down here, who I met down here. And he sounds a little bit Texan. Like anyone who moves around, your accent is going to evolve based on who you're around. But yeah, I mean, I really like Texas, other than the, like Mexican invasion coming across the border that they can't really stop. That's got me a little bit worried. And we almost selected Beto, but other than that, I like it.
Well, there's that Southern hospitality vibe, and I only spent about a week in Dallas when I was there, and I went out on St. Patrick's Day because it just so happened to be that week that it was happening, and we went to a bar that had probably 100 different taps of beer from a keg, and it was filled with people, and we were a group from the conference, and we ended up talking to a bunch of locals, and they were super friendly. So I don't think it's quite the same in the other parts of the United States. I haven't really traveled extensively enough to know all the different subsets of American culture, but I could see why it would be appealing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then Latino culture is ingrained in Texas, certainly. But I get people are just worried about being like overwhelmed.
Yeah, I remember
like, the mix is good.
I remember talking to a girl who was, on the one hand, complaining about immigration, but on the other hand, she needed the immigrants to come and do housework for her and like fix up her garden and stuff. So it's kind of it comes back to this same issue with multiculturalism. People who want to fight against it largely don't really understand the positive side of it and what they would be missing out on to end it. Mm-hmm. What's essentially done is stratified society so that these minorities are taking up different niches. So like the Mexicans, largely do construction work and things like that. And if they all go away, what's going to happen to the construction industry? Is it going to are there going to be issues? Like, I'm not seeing a lot of planning in that regard. So I guess that leads me to believe people aren't all that serious. Like, a lot of people are just saying, accelerationism, let's just crush the system, even though the system's existed for so long, it would be very hard to take out. But let's not plan anything for after it's done, because everything will just work out just fine. So to me, that's basically like a communist tier mentality, and it's a losing strategy.
Right. Yeah, I actually went country dancing tonight, and of course, there was like white people, but there was Europeans there. There was a lot of Asians and Hispanic people too. So it was kind of interesting, especially how many Asian people there were. Actually, I got kind of a good comeback on a point I made on Luke Ford's stream this week. We were talking about Wignats, and I basically made the point that they're kind of un-American and that they basically want to overthrow our government and cut up the United States into different pieces, create ethno-states and whatnot. And they said that that's the whole point of the founders, why they created the Second Amendment, so they had the power to overthrow our government. But yeah, which is kind of a good point actually, but I still think it's a ridiculous idea. But I didn't have like a good comeback right then and there.
Well, there's a few issues there. First of all, the original draft, I'm not sure which document this was, but this was one of the founding documents, was saying that America was for free white men. Not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So people come back to that a lot as an argument strategy, without really realizing, A, that according to this, Jews were considered white, and also Jews figured prominently in the drafting of the American Constitution. So there's two things those people are not willing to accept. And if you read through the Constitution, you learn quickly that it's a document that's basically all about how to form laws. And so I think it's called the Hart-Celler Act, the one that opened the doors for massive immigration.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was passed legally, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if these people want to argue from an American revivalist perspective, like go back to the Constitution, it's not really logical to do that, because the Constitution is what allowed for these laws to be passed in the first place. So again,
Right.
Back to this issue of people being unwilling to educate themselves about the intrinsic problems maybe that existed in the Constitution at its very founding. And this idea, oh, we're Americans, we're the best. We have this worldwide empire. Yeah, well, that's a Jewish empire, though. No, it's not. Well, let's look at the evidence. And then it just turns into this big spurg fest, and I get accused of being anti-white. It's like, I'm not anti-anything. I'm pro-truth. And if you don't understand the truth, there's this saying, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And it's a matter of pattern recognition. And the issue is that these patterns have been happening for a very, very long time. And it does kind of, you run up into a lot of problems because you can't always trust the sources for the historical record. Like, you have the mainstream source, and then you have the alternative source. And people fail to realize that maybe neither of those sources is actually the complete picture.
Well, I've heard a lot of argument about that 1965 Immigration Act that the Jews made happen. Then, I mean, you look at the Congress, it was 3% Jewish, 97% Gentile. So, I know that there was a lot of advocating on some Jewish groups and some members of Congress, but just always seems to be like it's 100% on, because some Jewish people are involved. It's like 100% on the Jews. So I don't know. It's just kind of interesting how that works.
Well, that's the issue, right? I mean, people are more likely to take a radicalized view, which is more or less a scapegoating view, rather than a nuanced view. And you can't really blame them for that, because when they get the sense that they've been deceived, and let's say, someone's watching mainstream media and that's all they've ever watched, and then they decide one day, well, this doesn't seem like the complete picture. I'm going to go on alternative media and find something. And they find Alex Jones. And the next day they're convinced that lizard people who worship Satan run the world. Can you really blame them for jumping to that, obviously absurd conclusion, but just based on the information that they had, it's unsurprising that they jump to these radical positions because they just don't have enough background information to take a nuanced perspective. And it is only a nuanced perspective that is going to allow people to move forward because it was a collaboration. You can't just scapegoat one group or the other because it really fails to understand the scope of what was actually going on. The best strategy, I think, is to follow the money. And even that, there's nothing in the US Constitution that prevents money from being used to influence political decisions. So then again, it's asking the question, like, do you want to have a society where money is the prime motivator for political changes, or do you want something else? And if you want something else, what is that something else?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've actually tried to give advice on that very subject, like blame the people that are actually involved, blame the elites that were actually involved. And certain people have, have agreed with me on that, but a lot of people don't. So I don't know.
Well, is it logical to think that Joe, the average Jew, was involved in the passing of the Immigration Act in 1965?
Well, I think that's like the cliche that people talk about, which I don't know if Luke Ford coined the term, but it's like big Jew versus little Jew or whatever. But people talk about that. I don't know.
Well, those are the questions that people need to go into in greater detail, because at the end of the day, it's a question of religion. Who is responsible for religious reform? And I think this has caused problems for many religions, is that they're more focused on out groups than the in group. So they're so focused on proselytizing. Like, I think, you see this in all the Abrahamic religions to varying degrees, but they're so obsessed with making the world in their own image that they're not focusing at all on what is the state of our own religion here. And that's why you get things like these, priests, etc., scandals where they're molesting children. And I think a naive person would presume that there exists some mechanism to deal with this degeneracy, i.e., kicking the priests out or something along those lines. But this is unfortunately not what people are focused on, because they've taken a largely imperialistic tack. And this is what happens when you're imperialist. You're not focused on the quality of the religion and the dogmas themselves. You're focused on, well, how many people did I convert this week? And I don't think that really ends very well.
I was going to ask this question to Doooovid earlier, but what's kind of like your general opinion? You're on a lot of Brundlefly shows, talking to some of those crazy anti-Semites and their fans. And I noticed, like, they like you, they like even if they hate all Jews, they like you, they like Babs, but no other Jews. So I don't know. What could you say about your experience in those circles?
I mean, that we may be like debating each other, and sometimes that's the use of the token, is to keep other people out, or they liking me as a method to keep other Jews out. But I'm not sure if I'm really friends with, what does it mean to be friends with people in that sense, and what is the purpose of those circles? If we're just debating each other again and again, doesn't mean anything to try to call us friends or something. And what does it mean?
I'm not saying you're friends with them. I'm just saying, like, what do you think of interacting with some of those people?
Well, because I enjoy debate, like, and those issues are ones I'm passionate about. It makes sense that I end up debating the bigger opponents on the opposite side of those issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think I really gained any friends from doing that. You might gain a little respect, on the battlefield, so to say. But I put that more to the battlefield. Brundle may be like okay because he's got a distance because maybe he wants to educate his son in a Jewish way, and he needs so he's got a tiny bit of distance about that question in his own mind of whether he wants to educate his son in a Jewish way. So he's speaking to me to like question of whether he wants to hide his son's Jewishness or just go Christianity, or maybe he's secretly feels it's important to teach his son these teachings.
I mean, I don't think it's a problem in mainstream society. I don't know how he's raising his son. Is it a specific religion or anything? But I mean,
Well, I mean,
I don't
he's
think.
raising his son Christian. That's what he says.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean,
But I mean, he's at least So is it just another opponent of the Jews, and we're arguing, or is he someone that has legitimate interest in Judaism that that actually is here to learn about Judaism?
right. Well, I mean, your average person doesn't think about Jews the way people in these circles do. They're largely accepting.
Yeah, people might have dissonance also, where they're skeptical, they're opponents, but at the same time, they're someone to say they're considering like, okay, do I want Jewish friends or do I want to hate them? In their so they're testing the grounds and thinking, well, I kind of like this Babs guy. Maybe not all Jews are bad, but like clearly they don't they don't like most Jews, and they still have a lot of problems with Jews, but they met a few that they kind of like. And what do they do with that?
Yeah, actually, in my first job in Houston, one of my coworkers was, I don't know exactly what he was, but he was definitely Orthodox, or I don't think he was Hasidic, but he would, we talk about Judaism because he wore a yarmulke all the time. He was at least Orthodox. But there's not that many Jewish people. There's Jewish people in Houston, but not like New York or Philly or something like that. So it's kind of interesting.
I mean, then you get like the good Jew debates, like Norvin or something like no, there are no good Jews type thing where it's like, okay, what like I looked in what I read about Judaism is not so good because they're against immigration or whatever their beef is with the Jews. That but they're like, oh, but like I met this few that I liked, and then it said, well, if your goal is to defeat immigration and recognize that the vast majority of Jews are pro-immigration and are somewhat involved in these issues, then like it doesn't pay to make Jewish friends. So if you meet a Jew along the line, even if they're on your side on the issue or appear to be friendly, say like just say no, because it's gonna lead you into problems.
These people are so deluded about Jews, they don't even want to have a discussion because they think they might be deluded into thinking something, or like a spell will be put a cast on them.
Wouldn't have to be delusion if you're just like, my goal is to end immigration and demographic replacement, and the fact is the vast majority of Jews are in favor of these things. So they're just not going to make Jewish friends along the lines. So even if they meet a few Jews that agree with them, saying like, well, chances are you're going to side with the Jews, even though you agree with me on these issues. And if you're not going to side with the Jews, like, what kind of Jew are you that you're going to trade on your own people? So it depends how much you value the issue. So I could see from a logical perspective, if you're an ethno-nationalist, that you just like, no, I mean, you're better off not dealing with Jews, staying away from them, not having any Jewish friends. Even if you find a good Jew here and there, probably it's better just to stay away because they're going to lead you astray from the mission at hand.
Yeah, maybe. That makes sense.
To me, that's pretty logical, like rational actor theory, like Norvin in that sense. It's a lot, rational actor theory. And then it's like, can you have the best of both worlds and be like, you're going to be friends with like a few Jews, even though you're fighting immigration and demographic replacement. But you're like, yeah, but these Jews are pretty cool. You're at the same time, and that's what makes the streams interesting. You're calling out the hypocrisy in people and saying like, well, you're a hypocrite. You're not really part of the movement. And you're saying, well, what is the movement? And it's just kind of stupid. Like, okay, like do you really feel like you're part of something from streaming or a movement? And if it is a movement, like a society of streamers or something, but people who feel like they're part of a movement, um, maybe that does mean something. They should be like, okay, you're not just streaming to have fun and blow off steam. You're streaming because like immigration is really important to you, and the reason you're on these things talking is because you want to do your small part in ending immigration, or like however a lot of these people feel.
Yeah.
Because I'm having these debates again and again and again, and like it always comes back to like immigration, and they're saying like, no, I'm here to tell you like your people are bad, and the reason they're bad is because immigration is bad, and your people are overwhelmingly involved in open borders. And they could make a reasonable argument like to that. And so either you got to just come back and be like, well, immigration is actually not that bad. Demographic replacement's not such a big deal. Or if you think like, no, I mean, demographic replacement is a big deal, and then you're in a situation like, it doesn't matter that you're one of the minority of Jews that are against immigration.
Norvin's super intelligent, though. I mean, he made a video talking about how Jewish Schindler's List was, and I was just like, oh my, wow, I had never heard of it. Jews are involved in that movie. That's just amazing. So there were some great takeaways in that video, but I'm blocked on his show, so I can't say anything.
Yeah, I mean,
disagreeing with him.
I'm not involved with I'm not a follower of his channel.
I wish I could say that, but yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it's just like, I mean, you got to look in the mirror. It's like, okay, like whatever. If you're a fan of Norvin, that's fine. It's like you're upset that like you can't get, because you're a Jew, you're being blocked from the Norvin channel, or you're just like hate watching him, and it's like what the hell? Like
you can only be so critical and not get blocked. I mean, that's the credit I give Luke Ford's show, right? Because a couple times I've been in there, and especially after the last synagogue shooting, right? He's talking about this terrorist attack, and there's a guy. His name is literally Adolf Hitler, and there's like a Joseph Goebbels guy posting this disgusting shit, and it's like, Luke, how do you allow this shit to happen? Like, how do you not block these people? But then I like it because I like arguing with these idiots. So the more people are in there posting their bullshit, the better it is, I think, ultimately.
Yeah, I don't like arguing with idiots. I was saying, like, I don't
like insulting idiots.
I mean, that's why I've said on these weekend reviews, like, people usually come to these streams to fulfill a venue they're not getting in real life. And if that venue is like ridicule and insulting people, because you don't get to do that in real life, so you get to, like insult your foes and ridicule them, you got to look in the mirror and say, okay, like I don't really desire to ridicule anyone, even my foes, even my enemies. Now that like, oh, there's YouTube, and like your enemies, they're on here, and you could ridicule them. Do you want to take me up on that opportunity? Be like, no, thank you. That like I don't care to ridicule my opponents.
Yeah, and I think the chat is getting better over time. I don't think there's as many insulting comments in the chat, and people are moving in a more productive direction. And I think our stream is uniquely qualified to do that because we focus more on abstract subjects like science. So I'm really happy with the direction things are going in. Maybe we can wrap up soon and get to the final words.
Okay, I guess Mike first.
He said he had to step away for a few minutes, so I can say that I haven't had a chance to publish anything on the blog in this last week, but given this new information Doovid's provided me with, I'm going to look at maybe formulating some more advanced ideas about the quantum mind and give examples specifically of how it works. Longer term, maybe we can set up some type of school situation where we're getting students to register. And longer term, that could be a venue for profits. So that's going to take some work, as well as some other people who are willing to put the work in now to get educated to the point where they can teach. I think that'll be a really worthwhile endeavor and will serve to bring us closer to our eventual goal of talking directly with Dr. Hamroff. So chat, try to be nice so that we don't scare away the good doctor. I'm sure he'll have some interesting perspectives to share with us just in terms of his journey, as well as what he's like. I'd be curious to know what his experience has been with the broader scientific community, because I know this is an idea that a lot of people have been really resistant to over the years. So it'd be interesting to see how he has noticed people more or less change their opinions, because if you Google it now, is the mind a quantum computer? It comes up yes, whereas maybe 5-10 years ago it came up no. So there has been a shift in beliefs there, a very foundational ideological shift. So I do hope that'll happen eventually. I haven't reached out to him yet. I just want to get a good basis of writing, and I want to bring something to the table so as to entice him to come on, maybe in spite of some of the trolls in the chat. But I think overall the chat's been pretty good. We have some very good regular contributors, and I do appreciate that. So please keep the questions coming, and I look forward to the next week in review, and I'm sure I'll be on a stream before that, and looking forward to the next time we have a chance to talk. I'll research a little bit deeper into this Fourier transform stuff and try to present it in a way that's digestible for a beginner audience.
Yeah, I guess I've been stepping a little bit away from streaming because I want to avoid the ridicule and unproductive conversations. And I think I've had most of the productive conversations. So until like we get a wider web of guests, this is the only stream I've been doing regularly. If people ask me, I'm willing to stream. I might pop on occasional video on my channel, although nothing directly in the plans. And I'm just going to keep on doing my research. If there's nothing to talk about, that's fine. That just means I'm just going to keep on studying, and when the time comes, I'll do some more streams, or we can keep on talking. And I'm looking forward to your next blog post, and hopefully some of the people who watch this will have comments on that. I might come on just to debate immigration or multiculturalism again and again and again, but yeah, I'm trying to step away from that. If I did a whole stream like JF, I did a response stream. I had like 10 studies that I read from and reports, and no one really critically responded to that. So it's just like I've done the research. Is someone on the other side going to do the research? And if not, I'm trying to step away from the ridicule and name calling, and just return to my research. But I want to have this discourse and conversation. So I'm there. I'm ready. I have my channel and people that I'm in contact with that I'm ready to speak with. And so I appreciate Jennifer doing this week in review, and keep us on point and focused. That's why I think the week in review is important. Hopefully more people will start to value this week in review, and come on where people could just pop on and keep us posted of what they're doing, what they're trying to do, and we could schedule more stuff through more people being involved in something like this.
Yeah, that's an awesome intention. Thanks for sharing, Doovid. I'm not sure if Mike is back, if he has any final words, or if he's still...
Yeah, I'm back. Thanks for having me on the stream. Do it again. Do it more often.
Thanks very much for coming on. We really appreciate hearing your perspective. And even if you don't feel you have anything to contribute in domain of the quantum mind at this time, maybe someday in the future, some experience you'll have will relate back to that and overall help further everyone's knowledge, because we all have consciousness, and it does relate to a lot of different things. So thanks again for joining, and thanks so much, Doovid, for taking the time to educate us and everyone in the chat. We'll see you again real soon. Take care.
All right, take care. Bye.